that the first things we learn are perhaps the more natural things in this life. So if we go back to the idea of the natural moral law, we have to ask ourselves, if we own ourselves by nature, by law, by truth, by reality, try living your life without self-ownership. Would you? And I think most people wouldn't. Most people would not live their life without self-ownership. And maybe they'll give away some of their ownership to others, but their self-ownership themselves, they wouldn't live their life without it, because they know if they didn't, they wouldn't have their life. Most people want things their way, and this is why some people have ego trips, right? When they do get things their way. But most people want to generally be involved in their own life, and some people are content to, help others out with their own life. But the question is, are you still in self-ownership of yourself? And it's not that everybody's practicing it in full, right? But you wouldn't completely disregard it because you realize it is essential. And that is the point, is that nature is always there and you realize it's always there. And you simply are choosing if you want to embrace it or not. And if you're choosing to disregard it or ignore it, you're giving way to the unnatural. So try living your life claiming ownership over others instead of self-ownership. Go ahead, start claiming others to be owned by you. Would you do it? Okay, because, we can relate that to slavery of the past as well. But I know that you probably wouldn't do it because you know that it's wrong. And because you know that you do not belong to them and they do not belong to you, right? Even your own child, you recognize as they get older, they have a mind of their own. And they too recognize that. They're like, man, I want to be free. I want to do these things. I want to grow up. I want to start my own family perhaps, right? They recognize it too, naturally, because that self-ownership is within our nature. And so if you're starting to claim ownership over others, what is that going to look like? What is that going to look like? It's going to start to look like a government, is it not? You're going to have to start being the man-made authority, is it not? What would you need to do in order to accomplish such? You'd have to create a system that makes it legitimate. Say, because I own you, I have to establish this rule and that rule, and if you don't do this, I'm going to do this to you, and blah, 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 right? So that is what they would do to justify something unnatural, is to say, well, we need to create a whole new system that justifies this unnatural thing, because if you create a whole system that is also unnatural, it makes the unnatural seemingly natural. It looks like it. But what ends up happening is regret. And that's what happens. Trauma, abuse, all these things that happen within kids' lives or people's lives, anybody's lives, it's simply from following the dishonest world, the denatured world. And so if we are to look at the natural moral law again, we can actually summarize it with these 4 different other names for it. The law of cause and effect, the law of attraction, karma or moral law, the golden rule. I mean, just think about all the many different names that have been talked about throughout history, detailing the same idea that human beings need to be responsible, that human beings make an impact in this world, and that what they do comes back to them one way or another, or it impacts the world around them that they live in, and therefore it will impact them one way or another. All right, here's a quote: "The world is good-natured to people who are good-natured." Wow, took a genius to understand this. I mean, not really, right? It's not a hard concept to understand, the natural versus the unnatural, but we tend to contradict ourselves, and I'm going to get a little bit more specific about what we're really contradicting ourselves on. But here you see the golden rule is talked about in nearly every religion. Do unto others what you would want done unto you, right? Basically said so many different times. And it's important because if you can see there's a tie between a lot of these cultures and traditions, maybe it's because they're recognizing something naturally there in the universe, something that assists a lot of people's natures, which is to recognize that, if you think something is moral and right, well then live up to it, own up to it. And, don't do something wrong to somebody if you know it's wrong. Treat others the way you want to be treated. So if you want to do something wrong, you'd be like, whoa, how would I feel if it was happened to me? It's the same thing as like putting yourself in someone else's shoes and really feeling out how they came to be. See, we're all, I could say we're all connected. I could say things like, oh, well, we're all connected in the spiritual aspect of the sense. I mean, there's a lot of people who might say stuff like that, and that's fine, right? But the point is that we're all human beings. So that's why, we have shared natures, and we all have the same capabilities to understand the truth. We all have the same abilities to understand knowledge, to have knowledge, to utilize it in different ways. And we created all these systems together, and when we come together and create systems, magic happens, like these religions who are compiling tons of texts and great knowledge. And why not learn from all of them? If they're all especially sharing something that is really crucial, why not, right? So there's this book out there called The Tao of Right and Wrong, where it does that. It basically looks at every single different culture out there and different religion and says, well, you know what? There are common trends within these cultures and traditions. And it's important to look at this because, it says in the top corner of this book, rediscovering humanity's moral foundations. They're there for foundations. This is why people still follow religions to this day, although they're becoming less popular, because people realize, some of it is used for control and mind control and preventing the individual from thinking for themselves. And I think that is really good of a development. That being said, not to say that we should just ignore everything that they taught and think, oh, it's not symbolic or there's nothing to learn from it. There's a lot that our ancestors learned, and we cannot just disregard them and say they were dumb, they were just trying to do things, and they were doing all sorts of weird practices. I mean, to this day, people are still doing crazy practices, right? Being all sorts of chaotic and different means. And I see the same trends now as I see back then. We just simply live in different environments with different tool sets. And I think the people back then would do the same thing that the people are doing now if they had those tools. The difference is that perhaps, the health may have been different and the different foods and stuff like that. But again, it's just a matter of the world that we create for ourselves that determines how we're going to be nurtured into the next world and, the natures that be. So if we are to look at the common trends, what we see is the law of general beneficence, which states that what is negative, there's a negative and there's a positive here in this law. Most of these cultures and traditions said do no harm, right? And they also said encourage and protect life. Very common theme. Then there's the law of special beneficence. Do no harm to family, encourage and protect family, right? Really basic stuff that I would hope most people understand nowadays. Now you say, well, this is really obvious, and this is why, religions may be going downhill nowadays. I mean, to the person who may have gone through so much suffering in life, religions and stuff appeal to them for that very reason, because it helps them understand something that they didn't understand about themselves. Even if it's really fundamental and basic to somebody else, it doesn't mean it's fundamental and basic to them or that they lived by it and really understand how powerful it is. Okay, there is importance in a lot of these concepts, and people do need a reminder of those concepts if it really helps with their nature and helps with the nature of the world. So yeah, I mean, your family, right? This is something that you create. You create your own family. They're your bloodline. That's what you're passing to this world, and you want to carry your wisdom with them. So I'd hope you'd want to encourage and protect your family. I don't care if you come from a religious background or not, right? Again, I don't really take bias in that. I don't really care. I care about these concepts. I care about these laws. I care about humanity, nature itself, right? And so, do no harm to family. Yeah, I don't want to do harm to anybody, right? It's just as the first law said, but especially also to myself and family, which people forget that aspect. It's like, I don't want to do harm to others, but I also don't want to do harm to myself. I cannot forget about myself. I'm part of the process. It's a process. If I start doing harm to myself, I might end up harming other people. And I gotta be very careful with that. The law of justice. Be honest, do not steal. You see this in all these traditions too. You can see it's even cited here on the slide. Be honest, right? Be natural. Do not steal. Don't give way to the unnatural, essentially. The law of good faith and veracity. Be truthful, right? Be natural again, The law of mercy. Care for the unfortunate. Care for people's nature. Say, hey, these people have the ability to be more natural. These people have absolute capacity to understand right versus wrong, to practice right? To practice or exercise their conscience, to have just as much fortunes as I have, they just grew up in a different place in a different time. That's okay. I could recognize that, and I can help them, or I can guide them, or I can say, you know, it is possible. You can end up like me, if not better. And there's a lot of people, some of the most suffering people on this earth, who start doing amazing stuff after they're suffering, right? And that's because they gathered the strength and the courage enough to change their current reality. And they saw they had to change it. And because of their learning experiences, it actually delved them deeper into magical creations, really powerful stuff, right? So we see this with a lot of inventors, a lot of people who are entrepreneurs. I mean, it's interesting, but everything we do in this life, whether you're fortunate or unfortunate, everybody can make an impact one way or another, because everybody's unique. Everybody has something to share. And so we can recognize that in everybody. The law of magnanimity, self-defense, right? That's essentially what that's saying, is that you should defend yourself or defend others if necessary from violence. And so the list goes on ultimately, right? Because you may look at those laws and say, well, you know, why call it those names, and what really proves that they exist? Those cultures were just talking about laws, but they're all detailing aspects of consciousness. I like my friend Ken Bartle made this diagram, and it says natural law, sentient living beings. Kenneth Bartle, right, his name is in the corner of this diagram. He details over, 20 natural laws here. And so he also says that if you do look at like the opposite, 8 correlates to 18, for example. 19 correlates to 9, for example. So stuff like that, right? Sorry, 11 to 1, 20 to 10, for example. So he's saying that these laws correlate with each other. I mean, there's beautiful systems. I've seen lists, hundreds of natural laws in the universe. And the point is that, like I said before, natural law is just a term for nature. That's all it ever is. And so all of these laws are, from my view, quite valid, because they're all detailing the universal and timeless. They're all trying to get clear about like what is in control of this universe, and can we use them? Can we apply them? And here, he made these so they can be applied in people's lives. Right, so they're very specific, of morality, of no trespass, of just consequence, of forceful arrest, of efficacy, of right reason, of reciprocity, of respect, of allowance, of commitment, free will, individual rights, integrity, equality. Very specific, right? And a lot of people will identify natural laws like this. This is the point I want to make, is that you can have an open mind. If they're all trying to detail nature, the natural law essentially is just nature. And again, because everything in nature operates by natural laws, the list is ultimately endless. And so several other resources that are really good for learning about natural law would be Natural Law or the Science of Justice by Lysander Spooner, Natural Law, the Real Law of Attraction, How to Apply it in Your Life by Mark Passio, great seminar. Right is Might, a basic book on ethical behavior by Richard Wetherell, very good book as well. Right? So these are great resources, and they all have perspectives of their own. They're not all going to use the same terminology, because in nature, you don't have one terminology to say this is how nature operates. You can't. Nature is just that great and that powerful that you cannot put one label on it. You can't say it's just one thing. It's so many things, as long as it's detailing nature, that is the universal and timeless, that is what has always existed. It applies to nature, and you can put on dozens of labels and use dozens of different words to describe it. So these are just some examples, and I think these guys do a very good job at describing different aspects of nature, right? Is it whole? Is it holistic? Well, even I admit to you, nothing will be whole and holistic of everything about nature. But after enough study of a lot of different philosophies about nature, you might be able to understand more about nature as a whole and how it operates and how it works. Right? And the time and place for all these things. I put out a documentary, Natural Law, the Philosophy and Science of It, and we can see it through teleology, objectivism, deism, Taoism, occultism, and there's so many other branches of philosophy and study that you can get into to learn about this subject. It's just immense and never ending. The point is that you need to understand what you should and should not do, right? That's the whole point of learning from nature to begin with. That's the whole point of creating religions or sciences and philosophies, everything. Because we're trying to understand nature and learn to live with it. Here you have another example, the 7 Hermetic principles, all right, which a lot of people who teach natural law may refer to. The principle of mentalism, that all is mind. Correspondence, that everything, right, corresponds. And so, as above, so below, for example. Vibration, right, everything moves, nothing is at rest. Everything vibrates. Polarity, right, there's, moon and sun, and, masculine and feminine energies, and all these different polarities, even right and wrong, hot and cold, right? And we can understand these and how they operate. Rhythm, right? Everything has an ebb and flow. Think of this like karma to some sense as well. Things will come back, right? So cause and effect, that deals with all these are connected, right? Cause and effect, all that is cause and effect. For certain things to happen, everything cause and effect. If I put enough motion or energy into anything, it will occur. Gender, right? Gender is really important too, because that refers to masculine and feminine energies. This one a lot of people have a harder time describing this one, but it usually refers to the fact that everything has masculine and feminine within it, and it's simply a matter of understanding both energies and how they make up the individual, for example, right? In the case of gender, some people might talk about left brain versus right brain, but it doesn't have to be like that either. Cause and effect, some people might want to differentiate and say there's a causation field and there's the effects field, and we need to focus on the causes, because if we get clear as to the causes, then we're not stuck in the effects. We're not stuck as to the result condition of the world. We're trying to change it. Thus, we need to focus on the causes and not get stuck in the effects. Right? People will do that as well for cause and effect. So they're all important. They're all really important. Effects obviously can help you learn about causes. Causes help you learn about the effects. These are all really important as one another. You can even see there's a tree of life diagram on the side, sort of connecting a lot of these together with many different aspects. You can even take in tarot cards. The symbology and the learning behind these concepts are so extensive, because they're all trying to understand nature. I'm not telling you that you have to look into all of them. You can understand the basic sense that I'm talking about, natural versus unnatural, and I think that's adequate for me. Adequate for me because I think it connects to a lot of these other concepts, right? We're understanding the nature of the mind, the nature of the universe, the nature of how things manifest, why things manifest. It's all the same deal. So, this connectivity, we see across the board, right? Even just simply our human selves in the natural world itself. You have a tree stump and the human fingerprint. You see that we are nature, right? We are nature, and maybe to even emphasize a little bit more, we are part of nature, right? We are part of this integrated whole. And so we can't say that we are nature itself, because I'm not that tree, I'm not you, but we are part of each other, right? We are connected with each other to some extent because we communicate with each other. We interact with each other. Every day, all the time, people are interacting with each other and the trees and the environment around them. And so we do have a connectivity, and it's really amazing to see that even down to the smallest atom, we can see some self-reflection and some order within the universe, potentially, right? But we might also see some randomness. But then if we see that across all scales, we see that as an order. There's a beauty in the universe that is found simply by studying nature, and that's why beauty is always referred to as another concept for study when we talk about nature. So here we have another quote. We often forget that we are nature. Nature is not something separate from us. So when we say that we have lost our connection to nature, we have lost our connection to ourselves. Very, very important. And just to prove to you how much this subject of natural law has been talked about in history, here's a list of people who've talked about it in history. I have it in my video, The Complete History of Natural Law. And I even made a timeline to show all these people and where they were in history, and I'm sure there's plenty of more as well. But when you saw, great revolutions and freedom and understanding what humans should do, you saw that usually in the application of natural law. You always saw great improvements in society with the application of natural law, or recognizing that there's laws that govern, human behavior or what have you. They're simply recognizing nature again. So this list is extensive, right? It can go on forever and ever, but essentially it's a lot of people. And to say it's just one way or the highway is not going to do it for me, because nature is a very complex subject to study, and I don't think we should necessarily wrap it in sophistry either. I think that people need to really reflect upon it for themselves and consider a lot of these views, right? Look into them a little bit and really see what these people were trying to say. And these people live lifetimes, right? And they experience different things that help them see more things. And there's a lot nowadays that people aren't experiencing. Again, we replaced a lot of things within our nature and our natural reality with unnatural things, to the point where we don't even realize, because we live in an unnatural world. We have an unnatural mind sometimes, may you see, that we don't always look at everything. So in the case of veganism or non-human rights, this might be one of those gray areas that a lot of people like to look at. And, it's something that is really important to look at, the fact that animals share empathy and they have, these emotions like humans, and they can feel for us and we can feel for them, and we can sort of nurture them the way that we can nurture other human beings and children. And I think it's beautiful that we share our compassion with them. That being said, we need to look at the history as to, how long have human beings been eating meat? And, is this something we can really take out of our nature? We see that nature and what is natural is so important, as to also understanding what is right and wrong, as I have detailed. So to really ignore that in the face of diet and nutrition and all the different factors, it's really hard to say there's one answer. In the same case with natural law, to say there's one way to teach natural law, there just isn't. There isn't one right action, there isn't one right guide. There is many great right actions and guides, and it depends on time and place. It depends on many different factors, and you need to learn for yourself. That's not to say it's all relative and dependent on purely human beings. I'm still saying you have to learn. I'm still saying there's knowledge that you have to obtain from nature. I'm still saying there's a source you have to look at, right? So if we're looking at non-human rights, right, because I'm saying we have human rights that we determine from natural morality based on our nature, then we have to look at the nature of animals. Their nature is different from ours, right? We have different capabilities to them, and that's why I made a documentary called Veganism, and it basically looks at it and it says, well, is it natural, is it moral? It's about 1 hour and 30 minutes long. I also have another video talking about the problem with animal rights, where I go over several different perspectives, and you can see that there can be some conflicts, even just applying the morality to the animals, and it's in the sense of saying, well, what if it is true? Even then, it doesn't seem to always line up. And of course, you can look at regenerative agriculture and using livestock with farming. It's beautiful what human beings can do. It's also extremely dangerous and destructive what human beings can do. It's a matter of choice here in this world, and all I want is for people to have knowledge behind what they're doing exactly. So we're going to go into very specific examples as we move on as to the natural and unnatural world. And so this is just one aspect that people like to talk about, but I think there's a lot more natures within it that you'd have to identify. Is the diet natural? Is the environment natural? Is the farming natural? Is the animal natural? Are you in a natural environment, Because this is all going to determine everything else. If you don't want to eat meat because you care about the animals and their lives, but you also care about your life and the life of other human beings and the environment and nature as a whole, and it's a very complex topic, because you have to be looking at all these natures. And animal respect, I think, is fantastic because it applies morality in a greater sense. But let's also not forget our own morality to our own fellow human beings and to the universe and everything in creation, right? We need to recognize that there's other natures present, and if we don't understand those, it can often backfire. We can produce counterintuitive results. The connection between instinct and conscience, and doing harm to animals and doing harm to ourselves, and nutrition and ancestry, right, and environments and exportation and fasting and different types of food. There's a lot of foods out there that may not be so natural, not just fast food, not just processed food, but plant-based foods that have never existed before. I mean, these are things we have to question, and there's too many things that need to be questioned that aren't going to be questioned unless you start questioning everything. And so I encourage you to do that. You know, really what we want and what's ideal is for the whole environment to work together. The individual and the animals and the plants and the sun, the whole ecosystem, one and together. That is the goal, and that's why regenerative agriculture can be the whole deal, because you have the animals, you have the plants, you have the humans all working together. And so perhaps the answer is not so clear, and that's why it's not so profitable, but there is an answer nonetheless, and it relies on consciousness. The fact that I want people to be conscious of everything, living things, not just sentient beings, and everything within their environment, because everything interacts with each other. And the idea with Stoicism, talking about the community of humankind, really details this, because to recognize that we're all connected and that community is formed when we have that natural affection toward each other, when we really care about each other. And that is something that is really crucial if we want to move forward, is that idea of love, of care. If you don't care about nature, where will you place it? Below you or above you? Stoicism, living according to nature, is usually its motto. This is a philosophy of the past as well, and it's becoming increasingly more popular nowadays for good reason, because, again, it's looking at nature, which we see as relevant. As we talked about before, Stoicism, and here's a slide about it, nature and the community of humankind. I did not make this, but I pulled it from a presentation about Stoicism. It says we ought to live in harmony with nature. There is nothing to be gained from trying to resist nature's larger processes. Resisting them produces frustration, anger, and disappointment. We ought to embrace nature on its own terms and accept our place within it as limited, finite beings, with limited power and a limited lifespan, but also as parts of something much greater than us. The self in Stoic thought is intrinsically a social self. From this natural affection stems the Stoic ideal of the community of humankind. Right? So this is really important as a concept, because you know, here you have another philosophy looking at the importance of nature, and a lot of people don't always look at, nature, again, in philosophy. So you may want to say, hey, Transcendentalism, Stoicism, all these other philosophies, great. They're talking about these concepts too. That's great. But it's no surprise to me, because they're all trying to find the answers here, and they know where to look. Remember I asked you in the very beginning of this presentation, I said, do you know where to look? And I think that when you look at a lot of these, you start to understand that you know where to look. It's looking at a place that is universal and timeless, that always exists, and one that you have to learn to live with. And those ideas are ever growing more because we are ever growing detached from them. So the natural moral law can be summarized as we collectively reap what we collectively sow. Right? We said this on an individual level basically before, but also we can apply it to the collective, because individually, if many individuals take certain actions, then what you have is a world that's created out of so many of the same actions. And so if everybody doesn't understand what is natural and what is unnatural, then you live in a world where people may not know what to have, right? What to persist. And so things will exist that a lot of people, most of everybody, are not going to recognize as wrong until more happens. Until they finally realize and say, well, it's not so necessary to have this thing or that thing, or there's more we can learn from this, and we shouldn't have just limited ourselves to this. We shouldn't have necessarily just done this. We should have looked at the more natural options. We should have evaluated more of our options, right? It's like taking a pharmaceutical drug and realizing, darn it, it did not help me after all. I need to do something better for me. And that better means something that works with your nature more. And so that's why certain drugs do really good over a long period of time, and other ones, they go on the market, they go off in the next month or the next few years, and people find out it's causing all sorts of things. And then soon you have a bunch of man-made drugs and nobody knows what's going on, because now you have a bunch of diseases. And it's really hard to identify what the root cause of the problem is, because there's too much going on. And you aren't the person, say the doctor's not the person that they're trying to heal. That's why communication is really important, so they can share knowledge between each other and distribute and find out what really was the problem. We collectively reap what we collectively sow, because it is the humankind that is a community. We're all connected. All our actions contribute to each other, influence each other. We see that children mimic the actions of adults. Even adults mimic the actions of other adults, right? We are living examples toward each other, and ultimately we feel the pain of others. At least we should. So we have a really core concept called time and place, because the doctor needs to know when to administer medicine, for example, and when to talk before administering that medicine, to find out more about that ailment, about that problem. And the time and place of, well, should I schedule my meeting here or there? I mean, the examples are endless. This is a very core, important topic. And every nature is unique. That's what makes it have its own nature. There is a time and place for every natural nature, and this is how we attain balance. And when I say balance, of course I'm talking about natural natures here. I'm saying that there is a place for everything. It's just you need to know where that place is, right? So there's a place for your conscience, and when you should use it, why you should use it, right? There's a place for your mind, your heart, your lungs, your kidneys. I mean, if they're not in the right place, do you think they're going to function properly? If they're not utilizing their function at the right time, do you think they're going to function properly? Everything is working in nature accordingly to a certain time and place. Now, do we understand that? Do we recognize that? Because that's important. Recognition is always important to our understanding. And so, I'm going to ask you a few questions about this, because I said there's many examples and there's many ways I can take this, but where is there unity? Where is there unity? Perhaps it's where things come together, where the time and place is coming together. When is an aha moment? When I say, aha, I found it. This is the answer. Oh, now it makes sense to me. It's when the time and place comes together. What does it mean to say we see eye to eye, right? Well, it means that our time and place is together, right? It's like, oh, well, why do we say things are out of place? Because things need to get in place, right? The time and place needs to come together. Do we know our place, right? We say we don't know this world we live in, or what's happening within the world. Do we know our place within the world? Well, this will determine, our time, perhaps. Why do we share our time? Why do we share our time? Well, when we share our time, what are we referring to? Referring to us being in the same place. So I want you to understand that time and place is connected here. And so when you have an aha moment, it's because you're in the right place in the right time for you to receive this aha. When we see eye to eye, we're in the same place, and there's a time that says, hey, we see, right? Present time. Things are out of place, right? We always talk about there's past, present, and future tense. And we're always talking about time. Time is always ever going. Time is movement and all these things, right? So time and place is always going to be a very important concept to understand here. And the main message with time and place is to understand that what we do with our time determines our place, and what place we have helps us determine our time. So let me read that again. What we do with our time determines our place. What place we have helps us determine our time. So, what is time and place made by? It's made by human beings, right? Because I decide what place I really want to be in, and I create this concept I call time. But am I really in charge of all the times and places? I need to learn what the time and place of things are, right? So, to some extent, you could say some of the things are made by humans, and some of the things are made by nature. But again, humans are sort of the interpreters, the observers of nature. we're taking it through our filter. We need to understand what we do with it. This is how we get a morality. So what we do with our time, so let's say I choose, hey, I want to, with my time I'm going to write a book. It's going to determine our place. Okay, well maybe in the future I get to talk with this person, I get to be here and be there. I never expected to be there, but I'm in my place because this is what I did with my time. That's what made it valuable time. And it gave me a valuable place in return. Now what place we have helps us determine our time. What place do we have in this world, right? What place are we to be in? So let's say I'm in a certain home, I'm in a certain household, I'm in a certain medical place, I don't know, what have you, but it's going to help us determine our time, whether it's patience, whether it's what we want to do with our life, how long we live. These are all aspects of time, because it takes time to do all those things. And everything takes a matter of time, but everything also requires a matter of place. So these are virtually connected concepts, and I want you to understand that. This is a very important concept to understand, because we talked about it quite a bit before when we talked about, well, glasses are useful, but is it always useful? There's a time and place for it. As long as we understand, however, the time and place for eyes itself. The fact that it's supposed to work, right? The fact that it's supposed to be here, the fact it's supposed to see, that's the time and place for these things. Here you have a quote, have a time and place for everything and do everything in a time and place, and you will not only accomplish more, but have far more leisure than those who are always hurrying. Isn't that interesting, right? If you do everything in an orderly fashion, in the sense of you understand where things should be, where things should go, think of it like Tetris, you will not only accomplish more, like in the case of Tetris, but have far more leisure. Because there's people who are like, oh my gosh, I'm running out of room in Tetris and I don't know where things should fit in. And I can't fit in all the pieces. I can't get more pieces in because they messed up, right? They screwed up. Now there's a lot of people who screw up in this world, and all the time we make mistakes. That's okay, but we learn. We learn time and place. And what happens? The more we do Tetris, the more we get better at it. I mean, it's an analogy that works perfect for time and place, but your time to put that block in the right place. And if you don't put it in the right place, what's going to happen? You're going to mess up. You're going to have to compensate, try to work around those pieces, and try to make sure that it works. And that's what we do with life all the time. We have to try to find out what works, and sometimes we have to do some configuration, but that configuration is mostly trying to configure time and place. Each one of us matters, has a role to play, and makes a difference. Each one of us must take responsibility for our own lives, and above all, show respect and love for living things around us, especially each other, right? Living things, all living things, animals, plants, the environment, and each other especially. Totally, right? This is a great quote because it's talking about how each of us is unique, and each one of us matters. Everything in life matters, otherwise it wouldn't exist. It's all here for the reason. Again, nature does nothing uselessly. Everything has a cause and effect. Everything is the result of different actions, and it's all just a matter of understanding that. Time and place. And truth speaks through time. Very important concept to understand here, because if we're going to try to say, well, we want to know what the truth is, or we know what the truth is, we say, well, there's been enough time to show we know what it is. Or there's been enough places in time to know what it is, right? And so time and place is so crucial to understanding nature and understanding what is natural to each nature. Because then we found, hey, this is the time and place for this is the time and place for that. Because we said, hey, this is natural for this is natural for that. And if it isn't, well, then truth is going to tell us. Nature is going to tell us. I'm going to say, truth tells us this happened. God tells us this happened. Nature tells us this happened. Reality, honesty, whatever you want to call it, tells us this is what happened, right? And thus, knowing what happened, we should be able to say, well, we can change that. We can do something different. We can make something better. Knowing time and place. Now, there's a really important text to talk about, and that is The Lowest Animal by Mark Twain. I figured to go over this text because it tells us the role of human beings within the ecosystem of nature. And I have snippets from this text, so let's read some about this. The higher animals engage in individual fights, but never in organized masses. Man is the only animal that deals in the atrocity of atrocities, war. He is the only one that gathers his brethren about him and goes forth in cold blood and with calm pulse to exterminate his own kind. Right? So humankind is really this only species that is willing to go all out, nuclear arms and everything, against our own species. Right? And so it's interesting because he's referring to the higher animals as those who just engage in individual fights, and the lower animals as those who have to have organized masses, I can't be responsible for my own needs. I need to hire this huge gang to protect me and my needs, right? I need to get together all these people so they can fight for my ego, my will to be done. And so man is the only animal that deals in this atrocity, which is called war. And so many people are like, well, we want to put an end to war, love and peace on earth. But do they realize where war comes from? How wars occur? And believe it or not, we're going to talk about what causes war. What causes humankind to be a lower animal when we're supposed to be higher, are we not? Or are we really? Well, let's look more into this. He states, quote, "Cats are loose in their morals, but not consciously so. Man in his descent from the cat has brought the cat's looseness with him, but has left the unconsciousness behind, the saving grace which excuses the cat. The cat is innocent, man is not." Okay, so what he's saying here is going to be summarized in the following. Mankind is reduced to a level below the domestic cat in this comparison. Twain means to point out that humans do certain things despite knowing that they are wrong. So humans will do things knowing that it's wrong, but they'll still do it anyways. Sounds a lot like order following, when you just do what you're told without thinking for yourself if it's right or wrong, or even if you do know if it's right or wrong, you still carry it out because you're told to do it. He satirizes this by claiming that cats can do no wrong because they have no concept of wrong, but that humans should know better, but don't. So we should know better, okay? Meaning that we need to have knowledge, again the emphasis. Because if they have that knowledge, then we know what is natural, what is unnatural, and if we act in alignment to that knowledge, then we obtain the natural. We manifest the natural. Here's another quote. "Roosters keep harems, but it is by consent of their concubines. Therefore no wrong is done. Man keeps harems, but it is by brute force, privileged by atrocious laws, which the other sex was allowed no hand in making. In this matter, man occupies a far lower place than the rooster." And of course, Mark Twain likes to use a lot of satire, but is he wrong to say this? Is he wrong to say this? Because and we can learn a lot from animals. I can look at a pet, right? A cat or a dog, for example, and I can see they're just living their life. They're just living their life. And as long as they have food, water, and shelter, they're not seeking to create a religion. They're not seeking to get a whole document and create a whole new system of government or anything like that. They're living their lives. And they want what everybody else wants at the end of the day, which is love, security, peace, right? They want the same things that humans want, but they seem to actually be more in tune with nature. If they get sick, they know they have to rest, right? If they know they're thirsty, they know they get water, no excuses asked. They're not like, well, I have a job, I have to work, I have to do this, and therefore I have no time to drink any water. It's really simple things, but the animals are really good at those things, and humans, not so much, right? We talked about before how we may not be able to apply human rights to animal rights because we have two distinct natures, different, right? Now, an animal could be suppressed in their power too. Let's say they're a pet or they're put in the zoo by man, right? Now they can't express a lot of their natural instincts. They don't get to do a lot of things. They have to be more dependent on man for their survival. They don't get to use all their senses that they were born with. It's very interesting because we can suppress other human beings the same way we suppress animals. And we can, attack them the same way we attack animals. The relationships are pretty similar. And there's a lot of people who care about human rights but don't care about animal rights. And there's a lot of people who care about animal rights but don't care about human rights. And equally so, we have to care about both. but we also need to look at the nature of those things, right? And the nature of the environments, right? To look at the holistic view of life. So we're not just limited on one box of viewing the world. Nature is a very complex ecosystem that does require knowledge. It requires patience to get that knowledge. And so, here he's saying, roosters, they have consent. Man won't do it by consent, right? He doesn't care about consent that much. But this is why consent is really important to look at. Among harm, among, violating anything within nature, right? Consent has a huge deal to do with it. Because if I do something inconsensually, I'm violating someone's freedom, someone's free will, their choice, their ability, their function, their nature. And so voluntarism is very important, but so is harm, If I harm someone, I'm also violating their nature. It's all a violation of nature if it's wrong because it's unnatural. Again, Twain places humans below an animal in terms of morals. This time he points out how ridiculous it is for humans to keep people against their will when even a simple rooster does not do this. The satire comes from making the conclusion that because roosters get this right and humans don't, roosters are the superior being. They understand consent and humans don't understand basic consent. Yet again, remember, humans are in the capacity to. So that's the difference. It's like, well, do we learn about consent? Do we promote consent? Is this something that is part of our daily life? Is this something that we lose over time because of certain reasons? Because let's think about it, right? If we don't value consent, then people who do non-consensual actions might be able to get away with it a little bit more. That doesn't sound so safe to me. Here we have another quote, "Man is the only religious animal." He is the only animal that has the true religion, several of them. He is the only animal that loves his neighbor as himself and cuts his throat. If his theology isn't straight, he has made a graveyard of the globe and trying his honest best to smooth his brother's path to happiness in heaven. In the process, wiping out tons of populations. How many wars have been fought over religions? Right? And what is a religion? A lot of people may say, well, it comes from the word religare, which means to bind, to hold back, to thwart from forward progress. Well, it's very possible that is the roots to religion. It could also mean religio, which means to reconnect, right? There's different ways you can look at the word religion. Nonetheless, they do divide people if we don't see a sense of connectivity, like we talked about before with the golden rule. If we can't see what they all share, if we don't look at the moral undertones, if we don't seek to evolve past ideologies of past trying to figure out who we are, at this point in time, we should have figured out more of who we are, not less, right? We should be evolving, not regressing. So it's amazing, we're the only religious animals. We will have all these scripts and say, you have to do this and do that, and this person's in this position and that person's in that position. And then you say, hey, it's within our nature to do so. I mean, hey, we are talking about our nature, are we not? But we need to see the hypocrisy within our nature, because some things don't always line up. He's using sarcasm here on purpose. He has one true religion, several of them. What he's saying is that every one of them claims to be the answer, claims to be the only way. And one of the first things I said when I first did this presentation said, hey, I'm not the only way. Right? This is not the only way to look at the truth. There is no one way to look at the truth. Look at all these people who talked about natural law. None of them are right. Because all of them are right, equally so. They all had something to contribute, right? They all had some sort of truth in them. If they were followed to some extent, it's probably because people saw their advice as somewhat valuable or pertaining to their circumstance. So if we understand that context, we can understand why things are natural to natures. For example, let's say somebody lives in the Arctic, if we're going to talk about diet. They can't grow any plants. They have to eat animals, and they need a lot of calories, they need a lot of warming foods. They're going to listen to their environments accordingly, and that is ultimately what's most natural for them to do, and therefore the most moral for them to do. Because they can't escape that reality. It's a matter of survival at that point. In the same way, if somebody tries to violate you, you have to violate them in response to self-defend yourself. But you say, well, why would you violate in response? You don't have to. You could take the pain. But you want to defend yourself so you can function, so your nature can continue doing what it's doing. You aren't the one who first took the violent, aggressive act. You're simply defending yourself. We'll talk about defense, we'll talk about aggression, we'll talk about a lot of these things as we move forward. So here we have another quote: "Of all the animals, man is the only one that is cruel. He's the only one that inflicts pain for the pleasure of doing it." For the pleasure of doing it, he will inflict pain on his fellow man. And that, you may say, is psychopathic, right? It's the only one that may lack that empathy. But, of course, some people might dispute this and say, no, there's other animals in nature that do this or that. But nonetheless, this is here for a lesson to say that man is not all great as we try to make ourselves out to be sometimes, right? We may have great ability and great capacity to be good, but it doesn't mean we are good or you are utilizing that good. So here's another image. I see humans but no humanity. I see humans but no humanity, and I think the image is also really symbolic, because I don't know if that's a robot or a little telescope thingy that's looking for humans, right? So it's possible it's either one, but if it is a robot, it's quite symbolic to see a robot is seeing that there's no humanity in humans. But nonetheless, you get the point. You can see humans, but you may not see humanity. You can see nature, but you may not see the natural, okay? And then, do you really see humans? Do you really see nature? And the answer is no. What you see is an illusion of it, which you may call nature, which you may call humans, which you may call right and wrong, but is totally an illusion, totally not based in truth or reality. It's not looking at the nature of beings or things as they are to be. So we need to get deeper into understanding our world, and this is essentially the real pyramid of how this world works. This is how the world is, right? Humans are actually at the bottom. We're not at the top. We need to respect what is above us, which is figuratively what's below us in real life, right? In reality, we say, yeah, the ground is below us, but then we also say heaven's above us, and we gotta look up to the skies, and the dead souls go into the stars, and equally so, yeah, we should respect the above just as below, just as we talked about before, the Hermetic principle of correspondence, as above, so below. They're both as important as each other. So, humans are just as important as the soil, but why did I flip this on its head? Why is the soil most important and all the life, the living things, are after? Well, it's because nature comes first. Nature comes first. Without the soil, you can't exist. Without the earth, you can't walk. You cannot live. And we see this as self-evident in nutrition, in every environment, that you need bacteria, you need good soil, and otherwise you can't grow any food, otherwise the animals cannot live, otherwise your gut bacteria cannot flourish. You cannot sustain yourself without nature. And so you have the greens coming after the soil, but the soil comes first, and that's why the soil determines the nutrient quality, the food quality, the air quality. The plants contribute to the air quality. The plants are right under the soil, and humans come last because we're not all that important as we think we are. We came as the result of everything else. Even if I were to flip this on its head, the soil is still taking up the mass of the pyramid. We still have to stand on something. So no matter what, the soil is the most important part. That's why I flipped it on its head. It doesn't matter which way you look at it. The soil is what comprises of most of nature. Nature is what comprises of most of nature. Humans are but a distant piece of time, right? And so we need to realize our place. It's not all high and mighty. We don't have claim to everything on earth, right? You say, oh, I want to close down this beach because I'm worried about this and that. Do you own that beach? How long have you been here? This beach is not under any human authority. This beach is for all of humanity to share equally. It's been here longer than all of humanity, right? So that is recognizing our power and where we stand in reality. Another great text is Ralph Waldo Emerson in his text called Nature, and of course his other one, Self-Reliance. And these are just some points from a slide that I saw online, and it states God is always near. Again, nature is always near. You can just replace the word quite easily. He reveals himself everywhere and at all times in nature, maybe because he is nature, that is the expression. In his presence we feel real delight, in spite of sorrow. We talked about, there was a quote, somebody feels real happy being with the stars and the sky and the wind and the elements, especially when you go away from it. Nature gives us better, higher thoughts and emotions because we're looking at this greater whole, this universal, timeless whole. I can look at this tree that's outside me right now, and it's probably lived several more lifetimes than me, and it's been there for a pretty darn long time, and I can't survive without it because I need the oxygen, you know? And I'm not going to go hug the tree necessarily, but I have to recognize it's important to be there, right? I'm important to be here too. We're both important toward each other. I help the tree if the tree can help me. Does the tree depend on me though? The tree has been here way longer than me. It doesn't actually depend on me, but more so I depend on it. So nature gives us a great sense of not just feeling, but actually health, right? So not just instinct, not just feeling, but actual results objectively. And so in the woods is perpetual youth, Ralph Waldo Emerson says. He talks about youth and beauty and all sorts of different ideas within this text of nature. A very good text I would recommend for a lot of people who want to study the philosophy of nature. It's one that I include within my second book. And he also mentions that every person should place full trust in himself or herself, as you should, because you are you. Never conform. It's one of the main issues with society. And society is not nature, is it? But society comes about from nature. And therefore nature is the roots. You lose the roots, what happens? Society crumbles, right? You can't hold the base of that pyramid because you get rid of the roots, you get rid of the soil, right? And again, same way, even if the soil's on top, you know, if it's not part of the ecosystem, you're falling face down. You need to stand grounded on that soil, and you need to realize that soil is what's keeping you up, right? And so if that soil is, hey, you know, let's say you are flipped upside down like that other pyramid, right, where the soil's up top and you're below. Well, you better hold on to your life then too, because the soil's still above you, right? So no matter way you look at it, the soil is important. Here's more information about the book on nature, and this is just the first chapter, some summary about it. It says to have a direct relation with nature, with God's divine creation, and go look out and look at the stars, right? Go out and look at the stars. Just look at the magnificence, the abundance, right? And question, what really is that, right? Can we really describe what these things are? Can we really describe everything in reality with just science? Why is there a field called metaphysics? Why is there a field called quantum physics, right? Why are there spiritual teachers? Why were there spiritual traditions? Why were the ancients so, you know, going to do rituals and try to connect with nature in different ways and use symbols as a means for change? Why do people do these things? And this book really sums up why people do a lot of those things. The mind must be open to the appearances of nature in order to achieve true wisdom, right? I talked about how this presentation is called Naturosophy, which is what? The knowledge of nature. My second book is The Wisdom of Nature. Number 3 here, the mind that is truly open to nature's own truth is poetic. This is something, maybe one of the reasons why I like poetry, but poetry allows us to express ideas, a lot of ideas, in very simple words. And sometimes simplicity is really important for nature because it leaves a lot of room for interpretation. A tree, it looks simple, you know? A blade of grass, it looks simple. But yet when you look deeper, it's working with so many different systems, so complex that it takes hundreds of thousands of years to figure it out. And even then we still don't know what it is. The lover of nature is he whose inward and outward senses are still truly adjusted to each other. A relation of correspondence or analogy between human being and all natural beings, right? What is essential is to be in harmony with nature, but to be in harmony with nature is to be in harmony with God's design. Quote, nature always wears the colors of the spirit, and nature is a mirror of the moral state of the soul. So you can see that as nature is a mirror of what is natural or what is unnatural. Thereof our actions, thereof who we are and who we make ourselves out to be, because usually the soul refers to our core essence, what makes us us, the self, right? And so how we portray ourselves, how we partake of ourselves determines our nature, right? Nurture, nature, nurture, nature, and how natural we will be, and that will reflect upon nature, right? Which is the natural, right? The nature all. Nature is everything, right? But everything you see in society is the resulting condition of individuals such as yourself, and how you come about in your life, and how you share that with others, and that manifests and turns into the reality. So we can either be distracted or aligned. Let's start with distraction. Distraction, the man-made, the not real, can only distract us without the natural. Okay, we don't want to become distracted in this life. You're watching this presentation because you want answers, and we'll talk a lot about action as well, right? But you came here because you want to understand what it is you're teaching or what it is you're learning. You don't want to distract yourself or waste your time. And so a waste of place or a waste of time is a distraction. And it's where time and place is off. It's not met. Okay, and this is with anything that is really not real or something that is man-made, because it's not the real deal. It's a supplement. Again, Aristotle said that whatever art or education we make is merely a supplement for what nature provides. A supplement, again, infers replacement, but that means something is not there that should be, and therefore we have a distraction in play. Now it may fulfill us short term, but will it fulfill us long term? Will it actually fulfill us? Well, distraction is non-fulfillment, in summary, okay? Because it's not really fulfilling. You do something to distract yourself, and you think it's fulfilling, you think it helps you maybe for the time being, maybe you even know it's distracting you, but you know it's not going to also really fulfill you, or at least I would hope you know it's not going to fulfill you. Okay, so don't distract yourself. You want to make sure that you are aligned with your goals align with the requirements to what you want to achieve, and therefore you achieve what you want to achieve. So the question is, what is distracting you? What is distracting you? Are you fulfilled? And that helps us understand then what is alignment. And alignment is the natural or the real, which can only focus us without the unnatural. So notice that distraction is the man-made or the not real, and that distracts us without the natural, okay? Without the natural present. But alignment, when you have the natural, it focuses us without the unnatural. So we're getting what we really want, what our body really wants. And so it's productive place, it's productive time. And it's where time and place is met. It's turned on, right? We're on track. We're not off track. Okay? So it's fulfillment. It's not non-fulfillment, right? It's actual fulfillment. I know what I need to do. I found the path. See, let's say you draw a straight line, right? You draw it, you're focusing on the line, and the more you focus, you maybe get to be able to do it better. But you look back at the line, you say, shoot, I messed up there, that wasn't aligned, that wasn't aligned. Every day in our life, we're living essentially on a line, may you say. You know, we're trying to align ourselves to our principles, to our goals, right? Trying to achieve what we want. But not that we actually are, but we're trying to move in that direction. So we're trying, you know, we may have like this, right? Trying to get on track, trying to go straight toward what we want, because the more we turn, the slower we get there. The more we're distracted, the less likely we are to achieve what we want to achieve. We will not be as fulfilled because we are distracted. So it's non-fulfillment. So we want to set ourselves on track. What is setting you on track as opposed to what is setting you off track? That is the matter of understanding distraction versus alignment. So if I were to say to you, are you acting in alignment to nature? What does that mean? That means fulfillment, right, of nature, which means what? It means doing what is natural, what fulfills your nature, because what is natural is of nature. So it corresponds. And so I hope you see the word alignment is useful when you talk about this. Not just the word harmony, which essentially means the same thing, or the word balance, which means a similar thing, right? But you can understand each of these words, maybe where they differ, but mostly they're referring to the fact that you know what you're doing. The common chain between these words is that there's knowledge being shared and there's knowledge directing what you should do. And so this is the main difference between alignment and distraction. If I had to put it in a chart, the natural aligns us, the unnatural unaligns us, right? The alignment is what keeps us productive, and this also ties into my other philosophy of productivism, but it keeps us productive of time and place, and so it is met, right? It is on. We are on. We're on to make this presentation. We're on to make change. We're on to create freedom, right? Whereas the distraction is a waste of time and place. So it is not met. It's off. Oh, the event's off. We're not doing it anymore. Oh, we fell off. It's not happening anymore. It's in our language, right? Alignment is fulfilling. Distraction is non-fulfilling. And notice I'm not necessarily breaking down these terms saying this is what it means in etymology, because I don't have to do that much. I want you to find out the context here. That's what really matters, is the reason, the context behind what I'm actually saying. Because you always want to get deeper to the roots. That's what it means to find reality, to find truth, to find the nature of something, which we will actually have a method to doing. I have a method to understanding the nature of anything. Now, is it the only method to understanding the nature of anything? No. But it's one that I use, and it's one that can help you identify what is this thing doing, and therefore what is its nature, right? The truth isn't going to bend itself to suit you. And so you have to essentially bend yourself to the truth. But really, do you have to bend yourself to the truth? Because we talked about what is natural being the embrace or the knowledge of nature, right? Whereas the unnatural is the disregard, the lack of the natural. So you're not really bending yourself to fit the truth. You would bend yourself if you want to go away from the truth. You would embrace the truth if you wanted to live with the truth. If you wanted to be aligned to the truth, rather than distract yourself from it. So if you are trying to bend the truth to you, then where's the authority? But if you're trying to bend yourself, or align yourself as a better term, to make it clear what we're doing, if we're trying to align ourselves to the truth, where's the authority? The authority is in nature if you're aligning to nature. Just as the authority is in nature if you say the soil, the earth is above you. But if you say it's the other way around and humans can do whatever they want and we can bend the truth to our will, then you say, no, humans are the authority in this world, even though they're temporary beings who always cause problems everywhere we basically look, because we don't know everything. Because no one person can know everything, right? And so I'm not saying humans are powerless and that they can't do anything, because you'll see even in Ralph Waldo Emerson's texts, in his writings, he says, there's power in human beings. They can work with the world. And nowhere do you see in a lot of texts talking about nature is to say, humans are powerless and shouldn't do anything. Okay? There's always work for humans to do. There's always, again, actions that are always being taken. We're always doing something. We can't say we're doing nothing. We're always doing something, right? Which we may call nothing if it's not something we think is substantial. But ultimately, we're always doing something, and there's always a reason behind everything. So we have to just know what we're taking, know what we're doing. It's a matter of knowledge, and that's how we understand the truth in the first place, so we can align to it. And if we're ignorant of it, then perhaps we do want to rule over it, right? We want to remain ignorant so we can say, oh, well, whatever, I'll just do whatever I want, until you learn your lesson and say, oh shoot, okay, never mind. Nature's more powerful than me. Okay, I shouldn't have gone against it. I should have listened. I should have sat back. I should have waited. I should have thought before I spoke. I should have, listened before I acted, like that quote we talked about before. So here you see, to find yourself, think for yourself, by Socrates. Again, perfectly said. To find yourself, think for yourself, because the natures are aligned. If you want to know yourself, well, think for yourself, because you are yourself. That's not to say that you should take everything only through the perspective that you take, okay? Because part of yourself was also formed through other people, and you can't stop that. You can't stop the fact that you are a social animal, as we talked about before, and how the community of mankind works together and is all connected. So it's important to understand these concepts. And so when we have that connectivity, we understand that we should share rather than steal. And so, if we are to look at what we may call the 7 wrongdoings, right? The 7 deadly sins, or whatever else you want to call it, the crimes, that which creates a victim, that which steals, that which causes harm, that which causes violence, all one and the same. These all connect to each other. Theft, murder, willfully lying, trespass, assault, rape, coercion. They're all forms of harm, they're all forms of theft, they're all forms of creating a victim, they're all forms of violence, they're all forms of violating ownership, they're all forms of violating nature. However, at the end of the day, that is what it is. Okay, so that's why, because of that, the fact that it is violating nature, people come up with gray areas. But these are not so much gray areas because people see they have direct results. And every culture generally sees these as wrong because of that. You know, there's this intent that is purposeful, and that's what murder is versus, say, killing or self-defense, right? It's different. Even though, yeah, you're hurting someone, the difference is what intent brought you there, right? You might hurt someone because they were trying to hurt you, right? Or maybe, you know, you can find some justification for it. We can look at the role of pacifism. We'll look into that. But the point here is that although there's 7 crimes that we can identify, there are 7 alternatives to these crimes, which actually is more than that. It's extensive. Okay? Because there's many right actions. I told you, there is no one right action. There's no one right guide. And you need to know the time and place to do these things, because maybe you shouldn't be the type to just share all the time. Yeah, I'm just going to be sharing everything all the time. I'm just going to always be sharing. Well, okay, I don't know if that's a good idea, because sometimes you need to keep something for yourself, otherwise you're too selfless. Same way you shouldn't keep everything for yourself, because then you'll be too selfish. You know, this is where you have the ideas of moderation, which Aristotle and a lot of the original philosophers talked about. Again, because we're not supposed to be going to these extremes. They're unnatural. So, let us understand the time and place, the natures of all things. You'll see that what is naturalizing is always going along the lines of what is natural, right? And what is denaturing is always going along the lines of what is unnatural, right? So, if I look at sharing, it's natural ownership. I voluntarily choose to say, hey, you know, I have this piece of property, I want to give it to you. Okay, that's sharing, willfully, consensual. You're not harming anybody, you're not violating anything. It's a choice that you get to make with freedom, and they get to make with freedom in accepting that gift. They may not want to accept it, right? Maybe they're so caring, they're like, no, don't worry, you don't have to share, right? Or maybe, you know, and what they're doing is ultimately sharing with you their compassion and saying, well, at least thank you for sharing, thank you for offering, right? So, theft, on the other hand, is unnatural ownership. Oh, okay, well, I'm going to take this from you, it's mine now. Even though you never had the right to that property, because it's not yours. It's not yours. It doesn't properly, naturally, morally, rightfully, truthfully, whatever word you want to call it, honestly belong to you. It's unnatural ownership. So, what's the opposite of murder? It's to create life, rather than to steal life, essentially, right? And so, it's a natural life, one where you get to create, right? Create new living beings into this earth. It's natural to do that, and it's also natural to live your life, to create new things. Create man-made things. It's natural to create man-made things, right? And there's nothing wrong with creating man-made things, so long as you don't forget the natural. So long as you know what it's doing to this world and you're not all wrapped into your illusions and thinking it should replace everything that is natural, as we talked about before with distraction and alignment, and knowing time and place. Well, what about murder, right? Murder is unnatural life. Taking somebody's life, saying you can't live your life. No life anymore. Okay, so it's not life. It's unnatural, right? It is no longer life, and that person is not living. That's what it means to have life, right? So what is the opposite of willfully lying? It's honesty, being honest, which we know honesty is another word for natural, truthful, rightful, right? So it's basically just natural truth, it's the truth. I'm going to say it. It is what it is, and this is what it is, right? I don't know how much explaining I have to do for these, right? Unnatural truth. It's not truth. It's not truth. It's not honesty. It's lying, right? You're doing it willfully. Now, you may say, well, what about if I need to lie to save myself here, to save myself there? That is where you're looking at, again, this sort of need for the unnatural, and you're making justifications. You got to be careful with that, right? Because you don't want to create an endless cycle of, let's justify this because of this. Lying should not be the prerogative. You know it's wrong, and that's why you're like, well, what if I have to lie here and there? Oh, well, do I have to lie there? You question it because you know you shouldn't have to do that. You know there still is a more natural option to do, but you just don't do it because of the unnatural circumstances. That you feel like, well, if I lie, it could help, it can provide some benefits here and there, more natural scenarios, you gotta weigh out the odds and you gotta weigh it out, right? And so you feel like you may have to do that, but I warn you to be careful with that. Because again, it's like if you have a man-made disease, and someone might justify a man-made medicine. But if you end up in this perpetual cycle and you never really get clear as to what you need to do and confront the truth and reality as is, then you might be contributing to the problem. You might be counterintuitive. And we got to be very careful with that. I say careful, I literally mean careful, which means wanting knowledge, wanting to make a positive difference, a natural, right, truthful, honest decision. And so you're being honest when you're also just expressing that, saying, hey, I had to lie here and there. I mean, you're being honest about your lying, which is quite funny within itself. But that shows you the type of character, right? The person who's honest about lying, I think, is definitely better than the person who lies and just does it out of cold blood, right? And does it all the time, or excuses themselves of it all the time, doesn't consider the repercussions. I mean, you really got to get clear as to what you're doing in this world, especially in a world like now, right? It's a world of confusion. You really got to get clear on who you are. Trespass, right? Versus consent would be the opposite of trespass, because you are consenting. It's like, yeah, do I want to go on this property? Well, do they let me on this property? Okay, then I guess I'll walk into their house. And just to be polite, just to be polite. That's what it means to be kind and polite, is to consider what other people's feelings are. And what does it mean to consider? It means to have more knowledge. It means to be open to knowledge. To say, well, what should I do? What will result in the better outcome? And that is usually asking questions. Because how do you obtain knowledge? One of the best ways is asking questions. And that's why asking questions is so powerful. And that's what contributes to consciousness versus the idea of an assault, right? I'm going to throw this fact at you, throw this fact at you, throw this fact at you. That might be considered assault in my view, I'll be honest, right? If I'm just going to look at the word by itself without the actual action. Assault can be that, whereas consciousness is like, let's ask questions, let's take our time, let's understand what we're doing. And so, if I'm going to go back here to consent and trespass, consent is natural choice. Again, it's not choice if it's unnatural. Consciousness is natural ability, right? Having the ability to do. And assault is, no, you don't have this ability. I'm going to take that ability away from you. You can't be free. You're not allowed to be conscious of what's going on. I'm going to make you unconscious. This is why when people want to do bad things to others, what do? They make them unconscious. Take this drug. Oh, let's poison this person. They'll never notice. right? Put them to sleep. They won't find out. What have they done? What has the people who ruled the countries for the many thousands of years in the world, what would they want done if they want to keep their control? They would want their population to be asleep so they can do whatever they want to that population, right? Especially if they're doing something wrong that they don't want people to know about. Well, what better way is there to prevent knowledge, to lie to them? As much as possible, keep knowledge hidden, because knowledge is the only good. So what if we are to look at boundaries versus rape, right? Because boundaries is the opposite of rape. And boundaries is recognizing, here I am, this is my space, don't intrude me, right? Similar to, again, to assault. These are all related to each other. It's understanding self-property, right? This is myself, this is my property. This is their self, their property. Does not belong to you, truthfully, naturally, morally, all one and the same. Guidance versus coercion. So instead of coercing someone and saying, you have to do this, perhaps guide them. Say, hey, well, what about this, what about that? And that is natural learning. It's not learning if you're saying, you got to do this and got to do that. You're not learning anything. You're just doing what you're told. Learning is a process of earning something that you actually gain for yourself. Not something that you're forced to do under your will, something you don't want to do, something that you see, this is why when people are told to do things, they don't actually learn, even if it's the right thing to do. They don't actually learn that it is the right thing to do because they weren't taught it is the right thing to do. Unless they find out through the effects of the actions that it is the right thing to do, people need to know, not just from the effects, but also, what is told to them, dishonesty all the way through. Let's make this world better from the grassroots up, every layer, not just one layer or another. And so it's important that we recognize everything that is naturalizing versus everything that is denaturing, because these are considered denaturing acts and these are considered naturalizing acts, right? And so when we understand the difference between the two, we understand what is natural and what is unnatural, right? And we understand that from the effects of these actions. We understand how they're being put into the world, what are their results, what are we getting over time? Time tells all truth. And so what if we are to look at the same crimes that we talked about earlier, and this time also look at vices? Now, what are vices, okay? Do you know what vices are? So Lysander Spooner, somebody from the 1800s, an abolitionist, right? And this individual was a lawyer, and he talked about natural law as well, and he wrote that text we talked about before, Natural Law or the Science of Justice. And he talks about vices versus crimes. He makes it a very important distinction that people should make. And the reason why is because I want you to look at the difference between the two and tell me what makes them different, right? What makes these different? Because a lot of people may consider drugs, greed, prostitution, idleness, gambling, drunkenness, gluttony. They may view these things as wrong. Some people are like, that's forbidden. We should never do that. But do they involve another person? Do they create a victim? Do they violate someone else's nature? Or are they violating potentially their own? This is the difference between a vice and a crime. A vice does potential harm to one's own life or property, whereas a crime does harm to someone else's life or property. Another way of saying that, again, there's many ways of saying it, is vices does potential unnatural effects to the individual, the personal individual. It's a personal choice. Whereas crimes, the person is violating someone else's nature, right? Doing unnatural things to them. So if we are to look at these, well, then crimes are more extreme than vices, and perhaps the reason why there are gray areas in morality is because one is more natural and one is less natural. Because somebody might go to drunkenness or gambling or drugs because they might be missing something natural within their own life, right? They may have some imbalances they need to work out, and so they say, you know what, I'm going to do this, it's not harming anybody, if anything I'm harming myself, but I know I'm doing it. And a lot of people do these actions, they know they're wrong. Like, they'll do drugs and they'll say, well, hey man, I'm doing it, I know it may be wrong for me, but hey, I need it, to cope. I need to get past what I need to get past. Right now I'm going through a lot. I need to take this or that, right? And drugs can be many different things, right? It could be coffee, it can be all sorts of caffeine, it can be even prescription drugs that people use to get by in life, right? They're dependent on it. And I can say to a lot of those things, I can say those things are unnatural. You're creating unnatural circumstances for yourself. I wouldn't consider that so great, right? I would say, oh, everything on this list is not good, right? Because it's not so natural. But am I going to say that vices should be forbidden and that nobody should partake in vices? Well, I would recommend against it with enough knowledge. But I would highly recommend against committing crimes, because that's why they're crimes. That's why every culture said, do not do these things ever, because that's how dangerous they are. That's how unnatural they are. See, if you're responsible enough, it's possible that the vices don't affect you. Somebody who drinks 50% more alcohol versus this other person who drinks 50% more alcohol could be totally differently affected. But in the case of a crime where someone's murdered, the effect is the same across every person that gets murdered. They're killed. They're dead. Whereas with vices, somebody can responsibly gamble, right? Somebody can responsibly use drugs. They can have greed, right? But maybe they'll learn in time. It's something that they have of themselves, a mentality, right? Prostitution, that's a personal choice. There's consent. There's voluntary interactions involved. Idleness, these are all out of consent of the individual choosing for themselves what they want to do. I shouldn't be able to tell someone, say, you cannot do that. I could say you should not do that, but I can't say you cannot do that, because I'm not them. I'm not their nature. They live their own life. I have to respect that if I respect nature. If I respect the natural world, I will recognize and respect the fact that they have the natural choice to choose vices over crimes. And any day, I would hope you would take vices over crimes. But again, if we can give no credence to either, perhaps that's a better option. Because as we see, gluttony is too much food, and drunkenness is too much alcohol. Gambling is personal risk-taking. Drugs are using unique substances. There's always a level of risk involved. Whereas crimes, the risk is out blunt. It's real. It's out there, right? And so drugs and gambling, these things can destroy people's lives and it can lead to crimes. But vices are not crimes itself. And it depends on the individual. It depends on responsibility. It depends on too many other natures. And because of all those dependencies, it's hard to really say for sure if they're right or wrong. And this is the same thing that we talk about with diet. Is there one diet that's better for everybody? There's too many factors involved. And that's what makes it more of a gray area. That's what makes it more controversial. Because you need to be looking at the individual and that environment and the natures that consist thereof. Because we can say crimes exist, and they're objective, and the way they are in nature are replicated effects, right? But vices, on the other hand, somebody can be gambling and I might not even know it, right? Somebody could be gambling all the time and spend all their money, and they might actually be okay with that, and they may be actually fine. They may actually live better because they're like, shoot, I don't even need all this money, and money is not really helping me anyways, and now I learned to live with less money. Maybe it was bad for them at first, but after a while it taught them a lesson. And maybe these actions actually taught them a lesson to say, well, you know what, I shouldn't do it anymore. Which is what all chaos does, which is what all evil does. It actually teaches us a lesson, if we are open to receive that lesson. If we still have the natural capabilities and faculties to learn in the very first place, right? So everything still depends on nature, no matter what, across the board. Whether it's committing or condoning or understanding, it all depends on the knowledge of nature. Greed is material fixation. Obviously, it could be a man-made manifestation. Prostitution, paid intercourse. You could be messing with the natural facilities of man, with understanding sexuality and how reproduction works naturally. And sort of overusing it and not using it in the right time and place. So people learn over time, and this is why people warn about drugs, Do no drugs, bro, you don't need that anymore, you don't need that. It all relies on knowledge. It all does, however, rely on personal choice. And you know what? We ended slavery. It didn't take a law to tell people it was bad. It took morality, because no one's even going to try it anymore. No one's going to try chaining up some fellow human being to a wall because they know it's wrong. And it's obvious, right? It's a crime, right? You're literally stealing their whole life ability to do anything, right? And you can do any one of these crimes to them. They're completely vulnerable. We'll talk about that. But idleness is doing nothing useful. Doing nothing useful, right? So you're not even using your nature. So these things are worth complaining about, but which one is more worth complaining about? And do we recognize the time and place of what do we do with these things? Because vices are too dependent on too many factors. So if you're going to say, well, let's make it illegal, let's impose it by law, well, you got to think again, okay? Because you wonder why there becomes actually more problems when you start to do that. And we're going to talk about that. Because it's a really important dynamic to understand. We don't want to be counterintuitive in this life. I hope you start to understand this message. Temperance is the most important message to understand when it comes to vices in relation to crimes. Because vices are not crimes, but vices could turn into crimes if you're not responsible. And so this is where sovereignty and self-mastery comes into play. And it ultimately means to work through yourself. This is what temperance means. And you can even find temperance as the tarot card, if you look at the tarot deck, next to justice. Temperance and justice is usually always put together, even in the four cardinal virtues or whatever, right? In philosophy, some people will know about this, but temperance and justice go hand in hand because you do not have right or wrong without some level of understanding ownership and responsibility and what leads up to those actions in the first place. Temperance is that binding bridge, before a vice turns to a crime. And it doesn't have to with temperance, right? Temperance can actually turn a vice into just a regular action, right? Something that is barely noticeable because you're responsible. Something that maybe actually does help you, or something that doesn't really make much of a difference. It's either harmless or provides benefit, as we talked about before. Instead of having the lesson of loss, we actually maybe get a lesson of gain to understand that responsibility over time, long term, can actually be pretty beneficial. So temperance is to work through yourself, right? And when we have to understand vices and crimes, we need to understand that suffering from vice, or allowing evil, allowing crimes, does not make you free. When you suffer from vice, suffering implies that you are not so much responsible, or at least it's taking you over, right? You're no longer in control of your nature. It's not naturally where it should be, because these vices are taking control of your life and saying you need to do this, right? Same thing with a crime. You might feel like I have to do this criminal action. And anytime you allow that, even if other people are doing it, say that's allowed to happen, that's not going to make you free. It's something to understand because you don't want to give any credence to evil at all. We see before that, if you have the unnatural and you justify the unnatural, you can be putting yourself in a cycle of perpetual evil, where you don't know how to get out of it, and you don't even know what life is anymore, which is where we get confusion, by the way, and where knowledge is really hard to obtain, or the right knowledge at least. And so when we talk about vices and crimes, both, again, are worth understanding, and both we need to have control over, understanding their time and place. And with vices, we can suffer from them. With crimes, we could allow them. And we don't want either one. But if we do suffer or allow crimes or vices, then that does not make us free. It makes us more enslaved. So you have to work on yourself, is what this is saying. You can say, yeah, you know what, I am partaking in a vice and I'm perfectly responsible, so I don't have to worry about it. No, you should worry about it. If you know it's a vice or something that can potentially do you harm, you should worry about it. You don't want to do harm to yourself. A lot of people may talk about, don't do harm to others, don't do harm to others, because it is important to talk about how we shouldn't do harm to anybody. But that includes ourselves included, because we must walk the talk. And not only that, but we are the ones who, need to be that example to the world that we want to create. and many other reasons I can talk about. We have to be healthy. We have to be natural. And that is the process of obtaining nature, of obtaining a natural reality, a reality, period. So you have to own up to your ownership. Use your nature or lose it. That's what it means to have your nature. That's what it means to have ownership in the very first place. You have to show it. You have to be it. And so use your nature for nature. Use your ownership for ownership. And that proves your responsibility. It proves who you are. It proves what is there, right? Again, just as the laws of the universe tell us their existence by its motions and by its effects, you prove that you are here by your motions, by your effects. And so you have to use your nature for nature, because you are within that system and you abide to the same laws and the same reactions, right? And so you, being a person of nature, needs to work with nature, and therefore, if nature gave you something that you are supposed to use, be sure to use it, because that will then assist nature. And so what we understand as well is comfort. Comfort is important because a lot of people talk about, man, we know peace and security and protection. We need to protect our assets, protect our rights, and it's important that we do that, right? Focus on trying to make sure that we are secure in ourselves, but without being enslaved. Right? Because you may say that the slave who was on the plantation and knows what they should do every day and is protected by their slave master and the patrollers, they're living a very secure life, right? Everybody's watching over them, but they're not very free. And so are they really at peace? Are they really at comfort? Or is the person who is benefiting off of these slaves and gets to do whatever they want, are they at comfort? And honestly, I don't think either one, to be honest, is at comfort really, because to be comfort is to be truly at peace and know that everything is okay and you don't depend on anything, right? And that you really have things together in your life figured out. And I say together, I mean, hey, literally in the sense of time and place. You have your life together. So the smallest unnatural change can be uncomfortable, otherwise unnoticeable. So when you're going along that alignment, trying to go along your path, right? Maybe you see it as truth and perception, trying to align our perception to the truth. You may fall off track here and there, and it might feel slightly uncomfortable. Or you may not notice it, and so you fall more off track until you do notice it, right? It's like steering a car, right? Maybe you are drunk in the case of a vice, and you're driving that car at the same time and you go a little off track, and then you're like, oh shoot, okay, I gotta go back on track, because that you soon realize over time that your place was out of place. You understand? So you realized over time for your place to change. And this is exactly what we're doing with this life, is realizing that the more we go off guard and the more we go off of our nature, ultimately, that's what it means, is to bring ourselves back. And that is what comfort is to understand that we don't want something uncomfortable, and we don't want something that is unnatural at all. We want to develop a sense of trust with ourselves, a sense of, I know what I'm doing, I have it set, but I'm conscious and open to the fact that I might be doing something wrong, right? But if I do my best to embrace the natural reality and live my life and not harm others, then I'm doing quite well, right? Because they're at comfort, I'm at comfort, and you can see it. So comfort is based on consciousness, and consciousness, you can say, is just awareness, right? The ability to see problems where they may occur. And so when something's uncomfortable, you say, oh man, well, this is uncomfortable, so I gotta fix my shirt. Oh, this is uncomfortable, I gotta make sure just to pull up my sleeves a little bit. Oh, I gotta fix my position here. Because if I don't, what's gonna happen? Maybe I'll end up with actually really bad problems, right? Back problems or neck problems or whatever, just from bad posture if I don't recognize it earlier, right? It can be unnoticeable. You might be looking at the phone or that device the whole time, and it's such a pattern of behavior, like, oh, I should just stay on this device, and you don't notice it until it becomes worse, and then you start to notice it, right? Because it becomes more uncomfortable. Now, again, the littlest thing can be uncomfortable, and that can be a sign, but it may also take some time, and maybe you have to adjust yourself and become more, you need to be more sensitive, right? You need to be more sensitive to your environment to realize what's going on, right? And this is where the idea of empathy goes on, and the whole other ideas as well, because without that sensitivity, the ability to sense and feel, that uncomfortableness you may not notice, right? So the more sensitive you are, the more you'll be able to understand it. It's the same way, like, if you train your taste buds to certain types of foods, when you try other types of foods, you'll realize and say, oh shoot, man, I can tell immediately this is not for my body. Or I can tell immediately my body loves this. And because you accustomed yourself and trained yourself accordingly to different levels of tolerance and ableness and sensefulness, right? To be able to detect what would be comfortable for you. So preventing problems is creating peace, and peace is comfort in this view, okay, of understanding that peace comes from this comfort, which is also consciousness, right? Because preventing problems means that we understand how those problems come to be, so we can prevent them from happening again. And therefore, because there's no problems occurring, you're at peace. You're living your life. You are comfortable, right? Now, if you don't detect certain problems, then you aren't really preventing them. But you can prevent them from growing further if you can detect them in time. So prevention is just as important as treatment. And to be honest, prevention should be highly emphasized, right, as the main treatment. Because that is how we create peace. Any peace at all. If we're going to say peace or utopia, the closest thing to that is nature, or living in alignment to our nature and to the nature of the world. That's a matter of time to understand, and it's a matter of consciousness of time to understand, because it takes time for us to learn. It takes time for us to notice what's uncomfortable. It takes time to know what's unnatural and natural. So now we're going to talk about Sapientia Naturae, which is my second book in the concepts within it, because this is what will give us direct experience into what is going on in our world. All the different aspects that may be denatured and all the different aspects that can be naturalized. So we're going to look at law, learning, growth, freedom, problems, effects, currency, medicine, attraction, powers, experimentation, facts, professions, religion, diet, environment, health, intelligence, change, leadership, simplicity. And that's a lot of topics, and there's endless amounts we can talk about, but this gives us a framework, not just of knowledge, but then action as naturally because of the knowledge. And so if we observe each one of these in their natural and unnatural alterations, we can understand what we should do, that of which is naturalizing and that of which is denaturing, that of which we don't want to do, that of which we have the right to take, that of which we don't have the right to take. So let us understand this, and let us first make sure that we recap and understand what is unnatural. What is unnatural is not what is natural, right? What is unnatural is not what is natural. It is the lack or disregard of the natural. And the natural is that of nature, right? It includes things which have not always existed. So let's remember that as we move forward. The unnatural is the lack of the natural, the disregard of the natural. It is that of which has not always existed. Let's start with law. If we look at natural law versus unnatural law, natural law is universal and timeless. It's always been here. You can see it as spiritual. There's a diagram that shows, it's Hermeticism. It's all these great cultures that talked about how it applies everywhere and to all human beings. And it's something that God gave us, written on the hearts of man. Part of the universe, something that we need to understand with our knowledge. It doesn't rely on some gun pointing at somebody saying you have to follow this. No, it's learned from with knowledge and understanding. And everything in nature operates by laws, may it be physical or mental or spiritual, behavioral, whatever. I told you there's hundreds and thousands of natural laws out there that people have identified, and the list is endless because nature is quite a magnificent, amazing, very complex system. A system that works in so many different ways. Natural law is quite abundant and present all the time, whereas unnatural law depends upon opinion. It's all based on man. It's what creates government and man's law. It is not universal and timeless. It is complied with not with knowledge and understanding, but because people are told to follow it, right? And it actually fails most of the time. And when I say most of the time, I say all the time, because if it's not aligned to natural law, then it's pretty much immoral or unnatural or unnecessary. And if it is, well, then natural law already exists, so unnatural law is just irrelevant. Again, unnatural is what is the disregard or lack of the natural. So if you're saying, well, there's rules naturally in the universe, but we're going to make more rules as human beings and say these have to be the rules, then you're claiming to be nature. You're claiming to be the natural law. And this, again, is why they use the term naturalization, as if it's natural for you to be born into their governments. When those governments are purely man-made, they decide, oh, these are the borders, these are the territories. It's all written on pieces of paper, which is all also man-made and dependent upon opinion and relies on people to be enforced. The natural laws are not enforcing man's law. Man's law is backed purely by man because man created it. So you have unnatural law and natural law. Essentially, the right law and the wrong law. The wrong law because it never works. Every time it's tried, it always fails. It always results in more problems. It is never actually useful for humankind. So these books and this gravel, right, that you see here, how long has that existed, right? and when was it made? I mean, these are man-made things. Whereas if you look in this natural law picture, I mean, this is just a depiction of the natural world and what really goes on in the spiritual dimensions, which really nobody can detail or try or attempt to show what it is. So it's totally a difference between what is always existent and what is not always existent. And law, of course, ties into all the other topics we're going to be talking about, because, again, there's laws for everything in nature. But the unnatural law is always going to be the one that imposes and says, well, you have to follow man's whim and man's opinion. So unnatural law says comply or else, and natural law says accept it, embrace it, simply live with it, right? So again, what is natural you obtain through knowledge or embrace. Unnatural is through disregard or the lack thereof the natural. So you're lacking the natural law if you're going to say I can be God and we can decide how everything should work for everybody and decide, well, how this person should live their life, how this person should live their life. You shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, because that's what laws by man do. And natural law, like gravity or density, would say, hey, if you drop this thing, it's going to fall. If you jump off a cliff, something's going to hurt you. That you can't get rid of. That is something that is always there. Man's law will always be changing because it never really works, because man can't decide for everyone how everything should work. No one man is capable of that within their nature. We'll talk more about this as time moves on, but we'll see a similar pattern here in the unnatural, where man is trying to play God. Man will try to modify animals, and this is the result, right? Unnatural growth. Animals should not be growing into malformations. But this is what happens, and some people may excuse it and say, you know what, that's normal, that's natural, that's necessary. There's a medicine for that, it's man-made. And what happens is it continues the perpetual cycle until you get to the root cause as to why is this happening to this animal? Is it being raised poorly in the first place? Is it being fed poorly in the first place? Perhaps that's what has to do with it. Natural growth, you see there's a tree, it's growing from the seed and it's naturally going into the form as it needs to do, as by the purpose of that acorn, as by the purpose of that seed. And so it's beautiful, right, to see growth occur. It's like a baby who has everything functioning properly as it should. And it's not to say, well, if you don't have everything functioning, you're bad, or it's not good, but it definitely can be better. It can be better. To say that we can be better, again, as we talked about before, you need to first think, yes, we can be better to achieve that better. And we can become more natural. I can admit I'm not living in the most natural environment. You probably aren't living in the most natural environment. So we may have some unnatural growth, right? Maybe even within our own microbiome, our guts. What Hippocrates said is also the root cause to most disease, right? And what we find out is 80% or more of our immune system, and responsible for digestion and nutrient assimilation and so much else. And so if we understand that all this stuff, that what makes us human is part of our growth, we're supposed to have these functions, we find out it is necessary. And even the things we think are totally unnecessary still have some sort of purpose and reason why they're there. Growth is essential to say there's a holistic blueprint that nature is creating for all things, and we need to respect that. And when we don't, we get malformations and alterations that are not natural, and we should not accept it. We should not say it's normal or okay, or we can fix that necessarily. We can say, why did this occur? How do we prevent it? And if we see, okay, this is new, this has never happened before, because of man-made chemicals and man-made alterations, it's clearly unnatural, right? And it's natural to see a tree grow because trees always have grown like that. Trees have always supposed to grown like that, right? And so, again, the unnatural is the lack or the disregard of nature, and it's of things that are not always existent. You can see cancers and diseases now that are not always existent back then, right? Or in different types of natural environments. And so if we look at learning, the same deal here. We have natural learning where the kids are working together and they're outside, they're communicating with each other, they have social environments. And what is unnatural learning? Well, it's the exact opposite. You have kids who are separated from each other, who are told what to do, stay in line, be compliant, do this test, this work that you may not even really want to do. Half the time the kids are at school just to socialize with other kids, but they're not there to do the schoolwork and all the other things that they're told to do. And they feel like they have no choice because their superiors telling them what they should do, right? And so it is very much unnatural because it's the lack of the natural, right? It's the disregard of the fact that people learn naturally from their parents and from their natural world and touching things and sensing things, right? But if they're wearing masks and they're in these isolated environments and they're not able to socialize with others and they're secluded to their own spaces and they're being dictated as to what their nature should do, they're not really experimenting, they're not really learning. They're not really doing what they want to do. They're not really being as fulfilled as they even themselves want to be. I mean, you can literally talk to kids and see how they feel about their condition. Their nature does not lie, and their nature gives many signs telling what is the natural learning condition, what is the unnatural learning condition, what is the natural diet, what is the unnatural diet. It tells us all the answers, right? And you'll see, here's a classroom. It has never existed before, right? This is man-made stuff, all man-made stuff. Look at the natural, and you see nature, right? And you see some man-made stuff, but it's working with nature and understanding what we need to do for ourselves to assist our nature and the natural world both. We're getting direct experience with both. So it's amazing to see. You can even see this quote, "Curiosity in children nature has provided to remove the ignorance they were born with." Mystery and curiosity is very important for truth discovery. It's not just the idea of care that generates stuff into our world. It's the idea of curiosity and mystery, and this is why we have it when we're very young, at a young age, because nature provided for us, just as John Locke said, to remove the ignorance, because when we're curious, we touch things, we get into messes we don't always want to get into, but we learn and find out what we should do. And this is what we do in nature. Adults still do it to this day. I'm going to try this. Oh, a new alcohol, I'll try this new product. Oh, that tastes good. I really like that. And they're curious too, and they know that new things invigorates their senses and keeps them going. Because they don't want to do the same old thing all the time. Let's do my office job, 9 to 5. I'm going to be doing this every single day. And some people are okay with doing it every single day, but even then they know perhaps that there's something better they could be doing. And so curiosity and mystery is what keeps us going, in the sense of being creative, of wanting to create something new, of wanting to find ourselves. It's part of our nature to help us learn. That's why I had to provide it with the learning slide, because it's really important we don't forget curiosity, and it's something that is suppressed. Again, if people are telling the children, this is what you must do, this is what you must learn, instead of rather having the kid, really learn and see what is it that they want to learn itself. What is it they want to experiment with? What is it that they want to be curious with itself? We are by nature observers and thereby learners. That is our permanent state, Ralph Waldo Emerson says. And so again, we are by nature meant to learn from it. We are meant to be here and really study things. This is what it means to be a Homo sapien, a wise being. And so that is our permanent state. You cannot get rid of our capacity to reason, to have knowledge. People can try to suppress it and say you cannot learn, right? And there's reasons why people may not want other people to learn, right? And we talked about deception and dishonesty and what that could be used for. But we see that we need to learn, and we need to observe in order to learn. We need to feel in order to learn. We need to look at all the different natures in order to learn, especially learn most holistically, right? About all the different natures to see how they all interact to obtain the most natural condition, may you say, right? But it's our permanent state to learn because it's something part of our nature. Here you have problems. This one's a little harder for people to wrap their heads around in my second book, but it goes over the fact that there's problems that will always exist. It's a problem, right? It is a problem. So, problems, natural or unnatural? Well, let's see. If it is a problem, it's still a problem, okay? But a natural problem would be problems that you can't get rid of, problems that have always existed, such as a thief trying to get into a house, a thief trying to steal someone's property, right? An individual trying to violate another individual. Right? Now that itself may not be natural, right, as an action, but to say it's a problem, looking at this macro view, it's natural to have those problems when you have freedom, when you have, a world where those problems are going to happen, because chaos and evil is going to happen. The question is, will we permit it? Will we allow it? What happens when problems, natural problems, get worse? Well, if it gets worse, by definition, it becomes unnatural. It becomes uncontrollable. And that's what you see with this image on the right. You see people panicking, a bunch of, armed men against each other, and smoke in the streets, and no one knows what's going on. It's not just one person against another one person. It's a bunch of people attacking a bunch of people, and there's businesses, and there's fires, and there's guns, and all sorts of things. It's not as natural as the one person who's trying to break into someone else's property. It's something that may have never existed before. A huge revolt, a huge war, a historic event in history that has never happened before, because it's unnatural. It's not something that would happen in a world of freedom. It's happening because of some sort of weird unnatural manifestation. Maybe unnatural systems at play that contribute to such a manifestation. Of course, this ties into the idea of unnatural law and the idea of unnatural power and the other topics we're going to be talking about, so you can sort of relate that to problems. But understand that problems, if we don't recognize and say, we can treat them and we can learn from this, if we don't learn from it and we continue to have it in our lives, then we are disregarding the natural. Disregarding the fact that there is a problem, and it turns into an even worse problem, right? With things that have never existed before, problems that are so hard to control that we may not even call them problems, we'd call them catastrophes. And those small one individuals who want to do problems to us, those are not even problems because we can handle them easily, because we are responsible and we have knowledge as to what they are and what they are trying to do, right? So a problem may not even be a problem. But a really bad problem is not a problem either. It's a catastrophe, right? It's something that is cataclysmic potentially. So just understand the context here that is being used. Here's a quote: nature will never confront you with a problem you can't solve. So that's saying a natural problem. You already have the answer. That is why the question appears before you. You're going to have problems within your life, and that is natural. Okay? Just because I'm saying what is natural is what is good, is what is moral, is what is healthy, does not mean it doesn't have any problems. Those problems teach you. Those problems are naturally there to teach you, because we are supposed to learn. Again, knowledge is the only good. Okay? Ignorance is the only evil. So, the question appears before you, but you already have the answer. So, do you ask the question? Do you grasp the answer? And that is what nature provides for you. You have the ability to self-defense against the intruder who wants to take from your property. Will you use that ability? That is up to you. So let's look at freedom. Natural freedom versus unnatural freedom. Well, natural freedom, do I have to explain this one? Unfortunately, in today's world, you might have to, because you live in an unnatural free world. Freedom is not granted to you by some pieces of paper. Freedom is not something dependent on pieces of paper or people's opinion or what they write down or what they say or what they do. Freedom is given to you. It is natural freedom because you have the ability to do anything you want, not that you will or not that you could. Freedom is ever present, okay? And so it's a matter of you taking that opportunity. Now, inversely, you may say, well, we don't have freedoms because our nature limits us, Well, okay, your nature limits you, but you can't really change that. That's part of your nature. It's like saying, well, you're a slave to nature. Well, it's like you're not really a slave because you can't undo that, okay? So it's just part of your condition. You have to learn to live with it. You have to learn to live with the fact that freedom may include some dangers, but really freedom just is freedom, right? And it is this ever vast ability to do anything. It's infinite possibility. And anytime you limit that possibility, the ableness to do something, you are limiting freedom, right? And it's not longer freedom. Even if somebody says, well, you are free, if you're not actually free, meaning you're not naturally free, then you're not actually free. You're not naturally free. So it doesn't matter if someone writes it on a piece of paper, that does not prove you're free. Okay, it's unnatural. It has nothing to do with freedom. Freedom, it may speak about it, it may help you learn about it, but freedom is a condition. It's an action, right? So it's not something that is just granted by pieces of paper and something that is reliant on pieces of paper. If we're going to look at natural freedom and the unnatural alteration, the lack or disregard of nature and your ability, then it's okay, well, let's write on a piece of paper. Let's make the paper determine your freedom rather than nature, right? Let's ignore it. And again, have these things always existed? The flag, this paper, these words, these people, this gavel? No. But the natural world has always existed. Freedom has always existed. That's what allowed us to make this very thing in the first place. So if it weren't for freedom, you wouldn't have this document which somehow gives you your freedom. Sorry, it doesn't give you your freedom. The only thing it can potentially do is help you recognize you are free. But that is of nature. That is of nature's God. That is of natural law. That is not of some piece of paper or man's law, going back to what we talked about before. What about experimentation? Experimentation is important because, again, we have this natural curiosity within us, or at least we should experiment. Every day we're taking risks, and this is what I mean by experimentation. Every day we take an action that we're experimenting with because we don't always know everything that's going to happen. Sometimes we do know what's going to happen. Again, that relies on responsibility, and we do know what could potentially happen, but we still may do it. There's a lot of factors that are involved with experimentation, but every day we are essentially experimenting, right? Every day is an experiment. Every action is an experiment. And we're trying to find time and place. We're trying to make an alignment within our lives. And at least that is the hopes, that's the goal. If you want to be more of a natural human being, you want to be a being that is living in harmony with your purpose, the intention, the answer. And so if you are experimenting, let's look at the child, right, on the left-hand side. He's experimenting, coming up with all these ideas and thinking, wow, what about this, and what about that, and what if this was like this, and could I do this, and could I do that? They're experimenting, right? Experimenting naturally. Now, what is the unnatural alteration of this? Well, you have a scientist in a lab with a bunch of man-made, equipment where they have to experiment with certain restrictions and certain ways of doing things. Is that really experimentation? Are they really experimenting with the natural world around them? No, everything around them is about unnatural things, Oh, let's see, can we hybridize this animal with this animal? Oh, well, what if we apply this medicine to that medicine? And basically, let's just, again, act as God and experiment with all sorts of things that probably aren't supposed to be experimented with, because humans need to stop touching and messing with the environment and messing with what nature has provided. And maybe sit back for once, and for once, just look out and see, well, maybe our experimentations are backfiring. Maybe we're trying too hard to play God. And that's what happens with unnatural experimentation. It's saying, well, you don't need imagination or creativity or mystery. We need to apply set models and specific ways of doing things, and we can change reality. We don't have to experiment with the natural reality. We can change reality itself, We can create a whole new reality, even though it may go completely against nature. Nature wants us to be curious, to be mysterious, but to what extreme are we going to take that? Because that is where it could become unnatural. Again, all these things are of things that have not always existed, whereas imagination and creativity has always existed. And what we choose to do with that would have to be separate things that we talk about, right? But most of the time, the child actually has a lot of experimentation within nature. They go out into the natural world and they say, wow, this tree, trunk, and wow, this water, I can feel it, I could swim in it, I could jump in it, I can go in the tree, I can, climb it, I can build a tree house, I could do all these things. And are they really replacing what is natural? Or are they really assisting what is natural? And they're learning, and through their natural learning, because they're experimenting, they are achieving new wonders for themselves, and it allows them to create more wonderful things, versus the scientist who has strict ways of doing things, is not really experimenting out of our heart and creating things by experimenting with the natural world. Things are much, much more different. That's not to say we shouldn't use any scientific practices. It's to say that we need to be conscious of what type of practices we're doing, if they provide natural or unnatural effects, for example. So, what about facts? Facts, yes, facts itself, right? Natural or unnatural? Well, natural facts would be things that deal with, may say, for example, this example, the human body, right? So the human body, natural fact is that it breathes. The natural fact is that it is a human body. The natural fact is that, there's skin and that there's things, right? These things, and we've identified them long ago for the reason that it is very much natural, these things are something that we can identify and say, yeah, it's part of our nature, right? But there's a lot of unnatural facts that we involve ourselves into, and we tend to put a lot of emphasis on that in an unnatural world. We'll put a lot of emphasis on anything that's unnatural in an unnatural world. Well, look here, you got the news, right? The news, as if it's somewhat important and new, because it is. It's not actually relevant. It is, you can see, you have somebody with a long pointy nose and a misleading headline, fake news daily, and it's consuming this guy's vision. He's put in fear. There's a lot of problems with news, no surprise, but that's because even if it was truthful news, guess what? Is it really natural facts or is it unnatural facts? So if it's talking about a modern day event and something that's going on, it's not talking about natural facts, which would include, well, you're a human being, we have morality, It's part of us. There's this idea called empathy and conscience. It's part of us. There's this thing called ownership. It's something that we all have. We're talking about facts of nature, stuff that everything has, right? But when we talk about the unnatural events, the things that are always happening so temporarily within our lives, and people put so much focus on what's going on in the news, most, if not all of it, half the time, more than half the time, is talking about things that are not natural facts. Not saying, well, okay, you are a human being and you have love within you. No, it's talking about this person does this action on this day. Temporary, doesn't matter. It's not actually talking about our nature, and I'm not saying it doesn't matter altogether, but you again have to be conscious of the natural in relation to it, and you'll realize it doesn't really matter. All these constant news stories putting people in fear and distracting them from the natural, it's because it isn't actually important. What's important is that we are all human and that we can unite upon those simple natural facts, and we cannot unite upon unnatural facts. Oh, this event happened in this day and that time and this history and that. It's all reliant on faith. It is not something that we can prove here and now, always and forever, right? It's not natural fact. So it's a natural fact I'm a human being. It's an unnatural fact that, I am standing here doing this presentation, on this day at this time for this event, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter, okay? None of that matters. It's not a natural fact that you can prove with your own eyes, right? With your own senses, to say that you have direct experience with it. So much on the news, people are just taking pure faith on. Just that people, they think they actually know them. Like this person, this president, I know this guy. But they act like they do, and they do research, and they think they know more about the guy. You still don't know who he is in person. It's not a natural relationship. So don't assume it is, but a lot of people will act like it is. And you may say, well, Cory, you're being a little too extreme here, A lot of the news is important. It helps us understand what's going on in the world. It has to deal with, the natural people, relating to each other. But I'm saying the problem is we distract ourselves from our nature and we lose control of our nature. We don't talk about it enough. We don't talk about morality. We don't talk about natural law. We don't talking about, these things that are always here all the time in these philosophical concepts. People aren't interested in that. They want to be interested in the temporary news-based system. That's because that's what they're used to, and it keeps them in fear and it keeps them going with the systems that be. All because those are unnatural systems that be. Otherwise, they would not exist. Because the natural systems already exist. Here you have effects, natural and unnatural. Well, self-explanatory. If you want a natural effect, is one that is supportive and nurturing and helps the natural things, right? Whereas the unnatural is things that may not support it and may actually, be totally counterintuitive, if not totally bad for the natural. So it's just that, here on the left-hand side, you have somebody feeding a plant, just for example, provides natural effects to the plant and maybe to the humans who then eat that plant, right? Or the animals that eat that plant. And you see here the unnatural is, some chemical plant with a ton of smoke coming from it. Is that really natural as an effect to happen? Do we really know what effect that has on human health, on our environment? And so you have to question, right? Is that a natural effect to occur? How long have people been planting seeds and encouraging plant growth and encouraging the growth of all things versus industrialization? I mean, this is the industrial age where Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau started writing their stuff about nature because they saw it growing rapidly, and they saw with it the moral decline of society. They saw with it people going crazy, distracted, too busy, rushing around all the time. The effects are immense and connected. If you give way to any natural or unnatural effect, so the world will correspond with that, okay? Again, as above, so below. The principle of correspondence. Here we see professions, natural and unnatural. A natural profession, you have somebody, hey, I'm going to teach you guys. I'm going to show you. We're in nature. We're together. we're here helping each other. I like doing my work, and you're here, you like joining me for this process, and you here have on the unnatural side this person who's overworked, drinking coffee to have to keep their energy higher on the computer, radiation perhaps, in closed indoors, having to wear certain attire, having to maintain some sort of image, being exposed to all sorts of unnatural media and fast-paced worlds. In no coincidence, I am going to be influenced by this too, to some extent, right? Doing what I'm doing. Should I be putting out a presentation like this to the world? Well, it's a moral obligation because I feel like I have to. But it's sort of also counterintuitive because I should be living my life. If I'm walking the talk and saying we should simply embrace nature, then I shouldn't really be doing anything, right? But I put something out because I see it, I have to, because of the unnatural world. But that means that this presentation should not exist naturally. But it does exist because of the unnatural world, that it has to teach us the natural world. And if we don't recognize that, then we fall even more to the unnatural. So knowledge is important, and that's why I'm making this presentation. And do I enjoy what I'm doing? I actually do. So there's a difference between the unnatural and natural profession, right? And you have to learn to burn out, and you have to learn if you'll be burned out, if you're going to be too exhausted, if your mood is going to change over time, if you're being too nice to people at work and so you take it out at people at home, or vice versa, or what have you. You have to really study your life and what you do within your life. Is it actually productive? Is it something you want to do? Not in contradiction with your honest truth and your honest reality, which is a reality that all of us mostly share. And this is why when you have a natural profession, it radiates to others, and you are happy, others are happy, right? And you're not excusing unnatural professions or unnatural effects. You're not giving way to the age of social media, because this can be a journalist, right, who is busy all the time writing the news stories on people, and people now have to read those news stories, and now you're contributing to a world of people who are endless consumers. But you don't even realize it, and you think it's necessary because you need a job and you need to make money. And where is that money? Is that money natural? Is this job natural for you to have? Is there a better profession to have? Maybe your profession is actually what is valuable, what goes toward the purpose and destiny of this world. You ever think about that? Profession is not just something you do as a grind every day. Let's just do this work 9 to 5 all the time and try to make more money. It's not about that. It's about making a difference, doing what we're supposed to be doing, being happy. That's what life is about, is it not? So why not start living it now? Because what happens when you keep prolonging it? What happens when you keep making excuses? And then what happens when you say, well, I'll get it this day, and so you wait and then you make sure it happens that day? What happens if it doesn't happen that day? Are you ready? Are you prepared? You need to start living that life you want to live right now and make it work, right? You have to listen and be conscious, and that is always what you have to do. And so when you sit down with yourself and say, what is it I really want to do, which is what I mean when I say be conscious, then you find out and say, well, wait, there is a natural profession. I want to do art, I want to do music, I want to do cooking, and I never got to this whole time, but it's important, so I need to find a way to do it, and I need to make sure I do it, and then maybe actually I can make a living off of that, and maybe I can do more with that, and maybe I can accustom my whole life to fit that, so that way everything works together. Because the problem is, if you buy a very fancy house because of your very fancy job, but you really don't like that job, maybe you have to get a smaller house and then you'll be happier. Sometimes less is more, folks. Sometimes things have to change because your natures demand it as so. So if I am to look at currency, which you often receive as a result of your profession, well, let's think. If you're happy doing what you're doing, you're probably happy, which is why you're doing what you're doing. So your profession is that doing, and your happiness is the resultant condition of that doing. So currency is what you receive as the result of that profession. And for example, a natural currency is love, right? It's not just value, it's not just purpose, it's not just destiny or happiness, it's love. It's actually receiving something meaningful and lasting and powerful, and you feel it and you sense it and you love it. You know you need it above all. You say, oh, well, I need money. Okay, let's see what happens when you lose your family. Let's see what happens without love. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens, because I'll guarantee you the natural currency is going to be more important to you at the end of the day when you realize how important it is. Again, a matter of knowledge as the only good and ignorance as the only evil. You can see that, that computer, those coffees, that whole system with that lady, I mean, it was not something that always existed. Same thing here. These currencies that are here on the right-hand side, which, by the way, all got devalued and don't last forever, right? They're not like gold and silver, which are considered more natural because they come from the earth and because they've always been used and because they're used for materials and creating things. Here you have the most unnatural forms. I mean, they're pieces of paper, and people think this is what money is, right? And yet they completely devalue. You'll have a $1 million, all of a sudden it's zero. It's zero, right? And yet people believed and actually thought this thing had value. Actually thought in reality it had value. No, it's not reality. It's an illusion. And they say, hey, I'm not living in reality because I'm talking about nature and the fact that humans need to go back to nature. You're not living in reality because you're still going to use paper things and think that they have some sort of inherent value, or that people have some sort of inherent authority. Nature has the authority. Nature has the value. Love and honesty and destiny, all these are currencies that will always outbeat these paper goods that will never ever last. Okay? Religion, a topic that so many people love to talk about, and there's people that are super religious and there's people who aren't religious at all, because we just need more extremes nowadays to keep people divided. Perhaps there actually is a natural religion, and maybe that's as simple as connecting with nature itself, which is universal and can apply to all the religions and also applies to people who are against religions. It's something that we can all understand because it's something that literally we live with every day. And we can understand that we make an impact. We shouldn't just be reliant on some God or Savior to save us or help us. And that we can actually change the world around us. We can actually do something about what happens in the world around us. But we can also have faith in our process. Meaning that with our actions we say, you know what, I hope that this presentation goes out to the world. I hope this makes a big difference. I hope that I'm doing my best. But I know I'm trying to do my best, and I know I'm trying to create that change. So there's a difference, right? I'm not just going to rely purely on faith or purely on reason. I'm going to utilize both and know their time and place. What's the time and place for spirituality? What's the time and place for science? They both have a time and place. And you know what? Spirituality can be a science, and science can be a spirituality. But a lot of people don't want to look at it like that. And look at here. What's unnatural religion? Well, here's this man who must be this middleman between you and the natural world, you and nature. Rely on him and their books and their systems, their man-made systems, which have not always existed, by the way, to rely on nature, to understand nature and the natural world and all that exists. You have to be dependent on their systems, and it gives them power, it gives them greed. They ask for money, which they say is the root of all evil, yet they ask for it all the time. And then you wonder why the world is the way it is, because so many people still give credence to this system of control. It is a system of control because it's telling people what to think and limiting their worldview as to what to think. See, if religion was really about bringing people together, they'd be open-minded and say, you know what, I'm open to other religions. I'm open to say I'm not the only one. Like I say with this presentation, I'm not the only philosophy out there, right? We're not just looking at one nature or another nature. There's tons of natures. There's tons of natural laws. And understanding that is the religion. There's a path. There's a direction we're heading toward. And we have a connection with it. But we don't rely on some middleman, some other person we barely know, or some person we're supposed to believe has some sort of magical authority or connection to God. What gives them that authority? What gives them that connection? And you know what? They don't have it. They don't have it. These people treat him like he's God, but he's not. And he's not supposed to. But yet he is treated more special than every other human being. I thought God treats everybody, on an equal level. I thought nature, everybody within nature is equal and has natural rights. Well, if that's the case, then what's with this unnatural religion, right? And so I'm referring to any man-made religion, usually when I'm saying unnatural religion. And natural religion is anything that just recognizes nature, and anything that recognizes the natural world. And if you seek that through forms of other, man-made religions, the question is, again, are you aligned to nature? Are you understanding the natural world, or are you reliant on man-made systems and man-made pieces of paper? You can see the Bible or religious text as a really helpful medium to the natural world. But realize it is not the natural world. Realize there are tons of translations and different interpretations and changes in language and tons of other occult books and other occult texts and stuff you've never heard of before, and libraries that burned down in the past, that we have never seen so many texts before, and yet we want to think that we know it all, or that one thing knows it all because it claims to know it all, because it claims to be the only way. Don't become restricted in your worldview. I mean, that is the epiphany of lacking knowledge, or the epiphany of deception or control. And you don't want to be controlled. Religion should be a freeing thing and a uniting thing, not a dividing and controlling thing. And don't get me wrong, science can be a religion if it's doing the same thing and limiting people's worldview, not letting them see anything about spirituality and why it always existed. Okay, and looking at nature and our connection with it and feeling some sort of meaning or purpose or destiny or intention, okay? There is reason to understand that both of these are right in their own respect, knowing time and place, both religion and science, and that the two can come together in different ways if we are searching for those answers, if we seek knowledge. And one of the documentaries that I produced was called Deism, which stands for Godism. This was a philosophy, may you say, that was around the 1700s that came to rise and seemed to just disappear, perhaps because it didn't put anyone in any station of power or authority, and they didn't ask anybody for money to promote their beliefs, which you may say are not so much beliefs, but backed by reason. They have a motto: God gave us reason, not religion. And there's even Theosophy, which states that there's no religion higher than the truth, where they combine several different religions and understand the base knowledge of all of them. Right? So I call the non-religion above all religion is understanding Godism, or natureism itself, right? Nature. And so deists were often referring to the fact that you do not need this man-made interpretation to understand the natural world. God or nature gave you the ability to understand the natural world, so why aren't you using it? Why not use what you were born with? Why else would you be born with it? So here you have another quote: "Man is the most insane species," and this is coming from a scientist. "He worships an invisible God and destroys a visible nature, unaware that the nature he is destroying is this God he is worshiping." Wouldn't they be connected, if there is at all? And maybe we can say, hey, we don't always know all of it, and maybe we don't know at all, or whatever. I don't care what your personal beliefs are about religion, as long as you don't impose it on others. Same thing for anything else. I don't care what your opinions are, as long as you don't impose it on others, and as long as we all seek to improve and learn. And that's what we're here to do, right? We're here to learn and provide new perspectives. That's all I ever can do, is, again, make you think. And so take that from me, is to understand, well, hey, I'm saying there's this natural world we all share. I'm thinking about unity here. I'm thinking about how can we bring people together rather than separate them and divide them. How can we still be open to other forms and new forms of knowledge without shunning out and saying this one doesn't belong or this one doesn't belong? Science and spirituality has always existed. Spirituality and science does not have to be a religion. So what about health, right? Natural and unnatural health. Well, it's certainly not natural for somebody to be in this position that this guy is in right here, where he's on a bed in a hospital, on these oxygen machines with all this stuff. Now, I'm not saying this isn't helpful for people when they need it, okay? But do they need it? Why should they need it? Because their health had a problem, and it must have been a serious problem for him to have all these things around him and all these things. I mean, it's, you have to question, how delve deep are we into our unnatural world that we have to justify these unnatural things? And what do we see with the natural health? Well, people are just living their lives. They're just embracing their nature. Again, knowledge or embrace. The unnatural is the disregard or lack of the natural. So he's not walking with his family in the woods, living life, happy, breathing. No, the poor dude is on his bed in the hospital and not surrounded by nature and not doing what he really wants to do. He probably doesn't want to be there, but he knows that he has to be there, perhaps to recover. Right? So it's important to just understand that it's not natural to be here. It's natural to be there, right? And again, what do you see here? You see a lot of man-made things that are all temporary because that's all it ever can be. But the solution, permanent solution, is being happy, is being healthy. Because if you have that, then you don't need to be in this position. You never will be in this position. Diet, very much related to health. You may say it comprises most of what we talk about when it comes to health. Well, a natural diet, you may say, may consist of plants and animals and anything coming from nature. Whereas the unnatural diet is something that is coming less from nature. So processed food and all these processed things that are all clearly man-made, right? I want you to take a look at these pictures, okay? And look at the unnatural and natural, right? And I want you to even look at the natural side and tell me which of these foods that are listed on the natural side, that's the left side of this slide, which of these foods are the most natural, actually? Because there's several different foods. Are they all equally as natural as each other? Well, let's think. Does man have any part in creating any of those foods? See, diet is a very complex topic because there's environments where people in the Arctic and people in the tropics have total different requirements to their body and total different foods that grow locally and seasonally. And people want to worry about harm to animals. Well, what about harm to ourselves? What about harm to babies and pregnant women and the environment and exportation? And what about, not being able to grow food, not being able to create breast milk? What about all these ifs and buts? Because these dependencies is what shows us our nature. Now, does that say, well, hey, we can justify the unnatural because of these problems? No, right? But how long have human beings been eating meat, for example? And as far as I can see, it's been forever. Since humankind's first appeared on Earth. It's not something that has been temporary. So salmon, which is listed there, is something that's going to be here forever, and other meats included. And I like the fact it's also shown as raw, because a lot of people forget about raw animal products. And if you look around the world, and there's still some people who eat raw animal products to this day, they're really healthy. And what are the governments and the unnatural systems of today doing? The unnatural law systems of today. They are banning the use of raw animal products. But yet it's healing so many people, it's providing all this nutrition that nobody can get. Because the soil's depleting and the plants are all man-made. And if they weren't man-made, how much nutrition was in them? You say, oh, there's tons of nutrition, but how edible were they? See, because over time, as the lack of nutrition went away, we created more flesh in these plants. And so these plants became more edible, right? And take of this as you will. But these plants, you even got olive oil on there. You try squeezing an olive and see how much oil you get out of it. You can probably get some good amount of oil, right? Maybe. Especially when you compare it to other forms of oils. Let's look out there, right? We got avocado oil nowadays. You try getting oil out of an avocado. It's got to take some processing. So people will call it natural, but is it really natural? There are things that are going to be called natural. We don't really know if it's natural. We have to really understand it for ourselves. And so we can become deceived by things that we think are natural but aren't really natural. And so these apples and avocados and carrots, and I love a lot of that stuff. I've had a lot of that stuff. But even there's plant toxins, and even there's fibers that block nutrition, and even in the meat, there's now genetically modified salmon, there's hormone injections, there's all sorts of things, and it can make the natural very much unnatural if we're not careful. So having all the dependencies, making sure your diet is as natural as possible is not as simple as just picking one item. It's knowing where that item comes from, how it's acquired, etc. And that all, again, relies on knowledge. Knowledge is the only good. Ignorance is the only evil. Unnatural. Well, if you're eating these burgers and stuff and you don't care about the animal's health, you don't care about their life, you are just in complete ignorance, complete disregard of what is natural, or what is moral, or what is truthful to this life. Right? And in nature, you wouldn't have all these processed foods in your fingertips and the ability to make pizzas and burgers and all these man-made foods. No, you'd have to literally scavenge an animal, learn how to eat it, learn how to cook, start a fire, or learn how to eat it raw, or learn what to do. And I think it's not that I'm saying you have to live in nature to learn what to do, but it does teach us nonetheless more of what we should do. Okay, it does provide us with a very valuable lesson of being responsible, of self-reliance, of self-ownership, of defending others, being with family, all these things that we've lost in the unnatural world, in any unnatural world, right? So it is one detached from their nature. And so if we're going to become more attached to our nature, we need to listen to our body and say, well, does our body agree with these foods? Does it really want these foods? Am I having gas? Am I having bloating? What digests really well? And have I compared it with different foods to compare? So have I tried raw animal products versus plants? If I think plants is the way to go, then let's compare it to raw animal products. Do I need to process any of these? Do I need to cook any of them? Because that also determines if it's natural or not, right? If you have to cook it in order to eat it, then is it really not natural to consume? See what I mean? But does it make certain things more natural to consume within that product, and therefore you think you can justify it? But does that make it by itself more natural to consume? So you have to really think about this, right? And if you expect me to just give you the outright answer, well, then you're deceiving yourself, and I'd be lying to you, because I can't know you. I don't know your life. I don't know your circumstance or your environment. Same thing for any other action in this life. I can't tell you, like, okay, go outside and be all loving to everybody. I mean, honestly, it's pretty bad advice, because let's say somebody wants to do bad things to you. You got to be able to defend yourself. Now, maybe love is the right response, right? Because it may be like throwing them off guard, and you're not feeding the fire, right? Maybe it is the right response. But what if it isn't? What if you really do need to take action? What if love is not always the answer, okay? Maybe it's always the end result and condition answer, the thing that we always need to have because it's part of our nature. But nature then is more important than love, because without your nature, you cannot love. Without your nature, you can't do anything, right? You can't have a diet. You can't have environments. You can't do any of the things we've been talking about. So a natural environment and unnatural environment, this one should also be pretty self-explanatory. I mean, you have an unnatural environment, right? Things, again, have not always existed. And, the natural environment, things that have always existed. And everything works together. I want you to notice on the left-hand side, you got the sunlight and the heat and the mountains and the plants and the bacteria and the soil and the water and the grass and the trees, and everything works together. In the city, if there's been many times where there's smog and pollution and still things are not under control, and there's mass consumerism and materialism, and people feel it, and mass working, busy, people have to go to vacation in the country. Some people have never even seen the country, which tells you that there's an issue with the world. People don't even know what nature is like. They've never even tasted blood, even though every animal in nature tastes blood every single day. I mean, what tells you more about how denatured we are as humankind? I mean, here you have a city, right? And these are skyscrapers, I mean, all the way tall with all these material things. I mean, is this necessary for humankind? Is this really how humankind wants to live? I mean, why do you ask someone, why do you like to live in the city? Social aspect, perhaps, maybe, sure. Okay, reasonable, right? They're social creatures by their nature. What else? Okay, for my job. Oh, okay, well, now we got to be very careful. Unnatural profession, possibly, and an unnatural currency as well. Unnatural effects as well, as they see over time it's not really fulfilling. As they find that over time it's not something they really want. So it's something to just keep a note of, because the unnatural is something that always deceives us, or something that's always the illusion of the natural. So we think, yeah, this is part of life, this is something I grew up into, it's something that I can live with, right? It's something I'm totally fine with, right? But is it something that really your body is going to thrive in? We see that people in the cities have a lot more allergies than people who live in the country. And you have to wonder, like, why is that? Perhaps it's because humans are supposed to live around nature. Okay? And not to say that they shouldn't live, completely in nature in the middle of nowhere with nobody, but not that they should also live with everybody in one small area where if one thing happens, everybody's affected. I mean, you got to think about what's practical here. There's so much land on Earth and so much resources, a lot more too than we're told, that can be used. And there's no reason why we also can't replenish these resources and understand what they're doing. And you prevent a lot more catastrophe. You allow more smaller communities and more tight-knit communities. When you're in the country, you see that there's people with different attitudes and languages in the cities, and they're less relaxed, they're more tense, they're more at stress, they're more contributing to the problems in the world and the unnatural because they're living in an unnatural environment. It is no surprise. So this doesn't make me anti-city, because I'm not going to say cities are not always going to exist, because I think, yeah, cities could always exist to some extent, more so towns and, local communities, but cities are where the catastrophes are going to happen, okay? Cities are where the unnatural is going to be most manifest, because it is surrounded by man-made things. So just know that, okay? If you're going there, it's a personal choice, what have you, fine. Again, no one's forcing you to do anything, unless, of course, you're under unnatural law, which most people are. We'll talk about that. Looking at the cities, you got to see, how much control is there, how much freedom is there, how much of all the other aspects we talked about, diet and health, how much of that is in the city. So let's look at medicine, right? Natural and unnatural medicine. Well, natural medicine is medicine that comes from nature. Unnatural medicine is that of which doesn't come from nature. Disregard or lack of the natural. So, okay, we can change this, we can change this, we can experiment, and we can make new drug. We can make a new drug. We can make a new drug, and all of a sudden we have tons of new drugs, and half of them go off the market, and only a few of them remain because they actually are useful and they work toward natural effects, which we talked about before. Effects that result in helping the natural natures. Okay, so natural medicine can definitely provide unnatural effects, again, if you don't have enough knowledge. Okay, because knowledge is what determines if you understand something to be natural or unnatural. But the difference here is understanding where our medicine is supposed to be coming from. And is there even a need for medicine when you have a healthy diet, a healthy environment, health in general? If you have health, then is there really much configuration in need of diet or environment or medicine? Well, it's likely because medicine, diet, and environment contributed to that station of health, to that state of health, that condition of health. So, again, here you have things that have not always existed, where man has created, and things that have always existed that man is sort of just utilizing, right? Now, of course, we might take some of that natural medicine and do more with it. That's usually how we end up here. And the less we do with it, the more we end up over here, right? So it depends on what humans choose to do with the natural world around them, and to decide if it is going to be medicine, if it's going to be natural for their usage, or natural to exist, like we mentioned before. Because something can be natural to exist, it doesn't mean it's natural to use, okay? Just a reminder. Now, among principles, in my second book, I go over two separate different types of principles. One was the naturopathic medicine principles, and the other was integrative nutrition principles, which usually applies to diet. Okay, and I have some different principles just to show on the screen here, but I wanted to get the general sense of things. People live by principles so they know what to do in their life, and everybody lives by principles. You can say that, morality is subjective, blah, blah, blah. You still live by some sort of guiding mechanism, and you still use the word right and wrong in different senses like we talked about before, because you cannot detach yourself from that. The fact that you have to make choices on a day-to-day basis proves that with your knowledge you need to be able to discern. And if you want to be able to discern more well, you're going to want to seek out more knowledge. You're going to want to learn more. And so you're going to want to utilize more principles and know what your principles are and stand firmly grounded upon them when you know them to be true, know them to be natural. If they are natural, you might be convinced that the unnatural principles are principles that are natural, right? But are they working for nature? Are they emphasizing the natural? And that's where we really understand things. So here you have, on the unnatural side, allopathic medicine. Allopathic medicine is modern or mainstream medicine, so it's new, right? And other names for allopathic medicine include conventional medicine, mainstream medicine, Western medicine, biomedicine, right? Whereas natural medicine, or natural principles, like we talked about before with natural medicine, it's something that deals with the nature of human beings and coaching them, nurturing them, helping their inner healer heal. So you're assisting what nature already exists to do and saying, well, it can do it better, it's meant to do it, and therefore we're just allowing it and optimizing it in sustaining it in its function, right? We're allowing the nature to be natural, which is to function, which is to continue to exist, and essentially then we're embracing it. So again, the unnatural is the disregard of the lack of the natural. It's not the embrace of the natural, so it's completely ignoring it, saying, you know what, man can play God, we can determine medicine, we can do this surgery here and there, we don't need to understand how the body works necessarily, we can just suppress this condition with this drug, even though that might cause this other thing. Because that's what we see with allopathic medicine. Oh, we give the pill to the ill. This person has this condition, okay, well, let's give him this pill. Oh, I have a headache, I guess I must take this. Okay, well, is that really getting down to the root cause as to why you're getting that headache? You know, and they end up keep getting that headache. Oh, I need to take more of it because it's not going to fix the root cause of the problem. This drug is really just going to suppress the headache, and then you know what? That drug is going to cause other problems. Again, it's not to say natural medicine is not going to do that either. It depends, really. Okay, but natural medicine and natural principles, if we're looking at it, is understanding that there's principles within nature that we can use that assist our natures. Okay, this really depends, again, on the natures that we're talking about specifically. So in the case of medicine, it's by definition, it's got to be medicine if it heals you. It's not medicine if it doesn't help you, right? It's not health if you're unhealthy, right? It's not diet if it's something that's literally garbage. It's not something meant to be consumed, right? It's not a problem if it's a catastrophe, right? It's not law if it's just some person's opinion, some person's whim, right? So this is the difference, again, between the natural and unnatural, the real and the fake, the reality and the artificial. So natural principles like the healing power of nature, identify and treat the cause, first do no harm, doctor as teacher, these are just principles because they assist the nature of individuals in trying to learn from nature. They're trying, right? And it's trying to say, well, here's a framework of action that assists the natural beings of nature. Because they do belong to nature, so why not start there? And why not try to do the least amount of harm as possible? We have to have respect toward nature. So that's why, first do no harm is one of the main principles in naturopathic medicine, and no surprise it's connected to the idea that we should not do harm in the lens of morality, right? Which again, you can equate to do not violate nature, which is essentially really what it is. Because you shouldn't harm yourself just as you shouldn't harm others. You shouldn't steal from, you shouldn't do something non-consensual, you shouldn't, there's a ton of other words I can use, but they all relate to violating or not violating nature. So, attraction, right? Attraction. The natural attraction versus unnatural attraction. So people talk about the law of attraction, right? Well, if it's a natural law of attraction, then it's something that's, okay, we want something in our life, so we're going to try to attract it more, right? But what's an unnatural attraction? You see there's a heart being cracked, so it's as if love is no longer present. So it's not an attraction by definition. It's the disregard or lack of the natural attraction. So instead of bringing people together, you're tearing them apart. Okay, that's not an attraction. Okay, so if you're saying, well, our relationship is meant to be, one where we separate from each other. We're not supposed to love each other. Is that really an attraction? No, it's not an attraction. Okay, so love is together, right? This is why when you put the ripple through the heart, it's no longer one heart. It's two separate hearts. If you were to bring them back together, you are attracting these two parts together to form one whole heart. and that it forms that relationship. Now, attraction doesn't have to be, just limited to relationship, right, and love. It can be talking about other things as well. If I want something in my life, anything, I'm going to attract toward it. You can even see religion as a form of attraction, because you're trying to attract and say, I want this good energy, this good faith in my life, and I want nature more part of my life, so I'm going to seek it, and therefore it's going to be my religion, right? It's going to be something I follow. It's going to be something that guides me, if that's how I see religion to be. Something that brings me together rather than something that divides, natural and unnatural religion. So, instead of dividing ourselves in case of unnatural religion or unnatural attraction, we want to bring ourselves together. That's what it means to attract. So a book, for example, is bringing ideas together, right? It's compiling different ideas and saying this is a compendium of knowledge. This is the orderly way of how things are worded. That is what a book is, and that's what it means to have an attraction not just to the knowledge or to the reading, but to the words. The words are together. They form sentences together, right? The connections are endless, but things are attracting to each other naturally, as because they should. And so when you naturally attract love, natural attraction, natural love, I think it can be complicated because people don't always know what is real love. Real love, right? We say true love. We'll find true love. Well, what they're saying is natural love. But what is natural love, right? Can I really say what is natural love? Can I even explain with words what is natural love? I feel like that can be kind of difficult, right? Because you're talking about a subject that so many poets have written about, so many books have written about, because it's an expression that is so powerful for the humankind, that has led us everywhere in time. And that's the thing, it attracts. Care, right, is that generative force. It's what allows us to create. Whatever we care about is what gets created into the world. So it's what we attract. It's what we embrace in this world. So what are you embracing, right? And if you are not attracting, what are you doing? You're dividing. So the disregard or lack of the attraction is dividing, right? And you got to notice that it has not always existed. You're supposed to love your parents, right? You're supposed to love the people that bring you into this life, and they're supposed to love you, because that's what created you in the first place. That was what was there from the very beginning. But over time and thereafter, people may detach from that love and say, you know what, no, it's not like that, and actually the attraction is broken, right? It's unnatural. So it's something to just keep note of. There's a lot of connections you can make with love, and I have, again, a whole chapter about this in the second book I would recommend looking into, because I think it's too complicated for me to address in this presentation. But if you get the point, you can apply it to love. You can apply it to anything that you're trying to seek out in this life. Intelligence, very important topic. A lot of people talk about artificial intelligence, what they may call AI in today's world, robotics, right? And learning, deep learning, in the sense of, well, this robot can self-learn for itself and have algorithms and operate through certain means. Well, sorry to tell you, it is unnatural, right? It's all man-made stuff. And these robots, although they may become more human-like, they are not humans in reality. And they were still made by man. And they are not nature, okay? And although they may have memory that we may think is forever and timeless, in this presentation I may think may be on the internet forever and timeless, that may not always be the case, okay? Nature is actually what is timeless and what has always been there. And so if there's anything that I have to pass to the generations that come, is to respect nature, okay? And so that's my duty, right? Past everything is to say, like, respect nature, because it doesn't rely on me or anyone else. We're temporary. Nature is always here. So many people are going to depend on artificial intelligence, especially since it has so many great abilities, that some people may justify and say, well, it helps the natural. Well, if it helps the natural, then it may have natural effects. Then okay, right? But is it all the way natural? And again, is there a more natural form? And so understanding that there is intelligence within nature is understanding natural intelligence, which people don't tend to talk about. The fact that the universe itself has intelligence. in order for it to be in order for us to create symbols like the Tao, right, the yin and the yang, the fact that things have polarities and correspondence in those hermetic principles we talked about before, the fact that we can identify principles in the first place, that means that there is some sort of intelligence. The fact that we can identify laws in the first place, the fact that we can identify words and use that to communicate with each other based on symbols of nature and what we have learned, and we have intelligence because of the natural intelligence, and thus we depend upon nature. What we receive from nature is what helps us become us, and what the machines learn, it depends upon us. So the machines depend upon us, but we depend upon nature. Natural intelligence is the root to all intelligence, okay? And I actually have a whole documentary about natural versus artificial intelligence, the unspoken comparison, one that's really important, I think, because we're living in a world where a lot of people think that, again, artificial intelligence is really important, but again, temporary stuff and often supplemental to what is natural. If you put so much emphasis on the artificial and the unnatural, you may disregard and completely forget what is natural. And therefore, you're going to have no choice but to go back to the natural, or artificial intelligence will take us over because we're not conscious enough of what it's doing. We're not using our natural intelligence to control the artificial intelligence, so the artificial intelligence takes hold of the natural, and we end up in a state of chaos or a state of confusion. We don't know who we are. We may merge with robotics. We're no longer human, right? And this is what will happen when nature is forgotten, when nature is disregarded, when nature is thrown out the door and said, well, it's nature, are we living down in the past? Oh, it's it's barbaric. We're not like that anymore. We're special humans, yet, we're disregarding morality still, and yet we're still doing all these other things. And, we're disregarding nature itself, and, we think we're these higher animals when Mark Twain says, no, we're the lowest animals. I mean, it's amazing. There's so much natural intelligence, and that's within ourselves in the natural world. We don't give ourselves enough credence. Now we're giving all technology all the credence. And then if we do give ourselves a credence, we still give no credence to nature. So that tells you that we're in some deep trouble, the fact that we can't get our priorities straight, right? The fact that we can't recognize there's intelligence that brought us to artificial intelligence. Because again, if we lose those roots, then the whole thing falls apart, it crumbles apart. You can't create artificial intelligence because you can't maintain it. You can't control it because you don't understand it. And you are not able to control yourself because of how powerful it's become. And so this is why artificial intelligence might also assist the unnatural systems that be, because it is unnatural, right? It can do what the controllers or the people who control others want, because it helps them act a little bit more like God or nature themselves, and the fact that technology or machinery does last through generations, the fact that it is more timeless and universal, okay? The fact that it can allow man to become more like God really looks to be a really powerful tool in the hands of psychopaths or people who want control, or the people who want to be natural authority, in the case of man-made authority, right? Quote-unquote authority. It's not real authority. They claim to have that authority, and they can legitimize it through artificial intelligence. Ooh, we got the intelligence. We know what needs to be done. We're spying on you all the time. We know everything, right? And so they can justify their own existence, just as they do through medicine, now through another medium. We have to be very careful with mediums as such, and all the justifications that are used to justify the unnatural. Again, regress instead of progress. Regress, using the unnatural, leading to or justifying the unnatural. And Ralph Waldo Emerson said it best. He said, nature hates calculators because there's this religion called scientism, which I consider an unnatural religion, which is this idea that science, is this answer to everything. And nature doesn't care about your calculations and your science. You shouldn't need that to prove empathy and human emotion. That's not something that you need to prove. You shouldn't have to, okay? Because it's part of our nature. It should be so simple and known. Right and wrong, natural and unnatural should be simple and known. Now, of course, again, we learn through time, so that's okay. I'm going to give some credence to the fact that there still is time left. But while there still is time left, human beings need to take action, and human beings do need to follow their destiny. Instead of calculating everything about the world, simply live and embrace your life. We're going to talk about what it means to embrace your life. When I keep saying, just live your life, like, Hey Cory, how do I just live my life? Well, I don't know. Start looking around you and see how much of an impact you make, right? And what is a positive impact and what is a negative impact? And why is it that a lot of the positive impacts, people are like, well, I wasn't doing much, but it seemed like it helped a lot of people? Because some of the most simple, powerful ideas are actually the most powerful, right? The simplest ideas are the most powerful. This is why people who get out of prison go to religions, and people really like talking about natural law, even though it's simple morality, because the world has lost it, even though it's so basic and simple. But yet it could have so much background behind it, even when you do look into it. Because that's how nature is. It's simple in the outlooks, and it's really complex when you look deep into it. But how deep do you want to look at it? Should we look at it deep? The answer is no. We can stay on the surface of things. We don't have to go deep into every little detail. We're not necessarily supposed to. We want to just have fun and live life. If we get so focused on the details, are we really living life? Are we really having fun? So nature does hate calculators, because otherwise calculators would have been naturally existing in nature. Calculators are a man-made thing that are temporary. Again, not here always. Nikola Tesla even said, today's scientists have substituted mathematics for experiments, and they wander off through equation after equation and eventually build a structure which has no relation to reality. So he's claiming right here that scientists today, people engaged in scientism in particular, are using mathematics instead of experiments. So you may see that as unnatural experimentation. And they wander off through these equations. You can see that as scientism, and getting so focused on the man-made numbers and man-made letters and such, and building a structure which has no relationship to reality, which is another word for nature, right? So we're not connected to nature anymore, because do you think the tribes who really cared a whole lot about mathematics, at their time? No, they were observing the world, they're living their life, they're having fun. That's what life is meant to be lived for. And so we think we're all genius because we invented all these numbers and languages and decide that we can figure out and analyze the world. But is that really going to benefit society? Tesla was constantly telling us that, hey, there's this natural energy and there's these natural things that come from the natural world that we can harmonize with if we just understand how to do that with enough knowledge application. But it doesn't require a deep analysis of mathematics and going through equations and keeping us farther away from reality. He doesn't want counterintuitive actions. I don't want counterintuitive actions. But yet we both want knowledge. Isn't that interesting? It is a mere question of time when men will succeed in attaching their machinery to the very wheelwork of nature. So Tesla seemed to be very aimed at the fact that we should really align ourselves to nature. And of course that's what I hear or see from this quote. And it's saying like, wow, the very wheelwork of nature. He's not saying change nature. He's not saying overwrite nature and try to, nature is imperfect and needs to be perfected by man. He's saying we need to work with it. So, in relation to that, we have powers, right? There are powers that be that want to be God, that say, yeah, we should change what's happening, that natural powers are not sufficient, that nature is not sufficient for humankind. We need police, we need politicians, we need this law, we need this government, we need this thing, this man-made thing, in substitution for the natural thing. In the case of powers here, for natural powers, I have conscience as the example, okay? Which, is just this, I don't know how you want to describe conscience, but if you break it down, consciere means to know together. You can relate that to the idea of common sense, okay? You have the power, the natural power, to utilize your own conscience to decide for yourself what is right and wrong. And if we all know together what is right and wrong generally, then we have a common sense. Like, yeah, it's common sense not to jump off a cliff. It's common sense not to harm someone else, to commit a form of crime like we talked about before. Right? So it's natural to utilize those powers. Now, it's unnatural to be an order follower, like these policemen here, and just following what is told of them to do. You ask any one of them, they're like, I'm just doing what I'm here to do. I'm doing my duty. I'm just on patrol. I'm doing my job. Unnatural profession, by the way. And they're suppressing their conscience, no surprise, because that's a natural function of their own self. They're conforming to everybody else that's around them, and they are conforming to the ideas of one person who gives them the command to do what they want done to society. So they are suppressing their own nature. Okay, now you say, well, they voluntarily consented. Well, what about the people that they're coercing? And what are they doing to those people? Is it actually, in reality, truthfully, morally justified for them to do what they're doing? And so there's a great question as to the powers that be in relation to understanding nature. And we're going to go deep into that as we move on, because it's important, if we want to change the world around us, to look at what really is trying to get rid of natural authority. And in this case, you have these people who think they have more authority by putting on a badge and uniform. I am this. This gives me more rights than my fellow man. I can do this, which no one else can do because I'm a policeman. No, that does not change the nature of who you are. That does not change the nature of a human being. You think it does, and you may be able to convince others that that is so, but that is dishonest. That's a lie. That's not truthful, okay? You are not a police born by nature. You got there because you were convinced that you should be, or that others are conforming to you because they are in fear and that they should be, right? You are all playing into the system as a system of pawns. They don't care about you. And you end up on these ego trips of, I need to be in this station of power to prevent other problems from happening. Is that really so? Is it natural for you to do so? Have you ever questioned, ever, once before in your life, if it's actually natural or moral in the grand scheme of things? Okay, we're going to talk about that. I don't mean to offend anybody, because I know you deep down inside are just a human being. So I hope you can see the sense of intention within me, that I don't want to offend anybody. If I do, I'm sorry, okay, but I am going to tell it in the fact that you are just a human being, and we all are just human beings, and not one of us is any different or unique from any other one of us. We're all natural human beings. So what about change, right? Change itself, the idea of change, and change is always occurring, right? You can see that I have the clock there because I wanted to represent the idea of time, not that the time is dependent upon this man-made item of a clock, okay? I had to pick a picture for change. I didn't really know what to pick, I'll be honest, but the natural change, you see there's books for knowledge, right? Maybe some equations trying to figure things out within that knowledge, and time, right? Because change requires a lot of time, and it requires understanding what belongs and what doesn't. This is the idea of integration and abolition. Integration is bringing things in. Abolition is getting things out, right? So we'll talk more about that as time moves on. What is unnatural change? Well, I am begging for change. I'm not going to be the change. I'm not going to show it in action. I'm not going to learn. I'm going to say and demand and say this is what needs to be done because I say so, because of my opinion, because of my whim, pure whim, right? Not based on nature or what is natural. Keep your laws off my body, as if this person is asking for permission to be free, asking for permission to exercise their own nature, right? And meanwhile, they're also wearing a mask which their laws probably told them to wear and convinced them to wear, right? Regardless of your views on that subject. They are following the idea that change comes through politics, the idea that change comes through the media, right? Purely through the media, through politics, and through other people other than themselves. And that change does not rely on education or time or morality or understanding truth and what is natural and unnatural. They don't want to look at that. It's all about begging for permission other people be responsible for their own responsibilities. It's abdicating their own nature, giving it away, disregard, right? Again, the unnatural. So instead of learning, instead of time-based learning as well, instead of really grasping things for ourselves and thinking things through, we're yelling and demanding and begging, right? And we're not really being the change, as Gandhi would say. And so it's a disregard or a lack of what natural learning is, because in order to learn, that's why we learn, is to change. It's to create a better difference, to create a better world. Leadership, right? Leadership, natural or unnatural. If I'm a natural leader, what am I? It's not that I'm born by nature as some sort of leader. It's because I'm able to lead people in their natural natures to be great just as much as myself. Maybe encourage them to be leaders too. I'm pointing, I'm showing a way. I'm not saying that you depend upon me for the world's condition. I'm not a politician, right? I'm not here saying you have to give me money to fund my living and I have to take that money by threat of violence, because that's ultimately what it's backed by. Okay, so I'm not saying that. I'm saying I'm going to show you the way, and if you want to follow, it's up to you. I'm going to show by example, by my authenticity, and you're going to respect it of me, because that's what makes me a leader, by the way. And I'm going to show my actions through who I am. That's what proves who I am. I'm not just going to come to you with some speech and make you tear and make you all emotional and say, well, everything that you want to say and make you feel all happy inside. I'm going to show you by my actions. I'm going to be on the front lines leading the charge and showing this is what must be done, right? That's what leadership is, because you're in the lead. You're on the front and you're leading the ship to shore, right? You're helping people. You're right there with them. Unnatural leadership, total opposite. Total opposite. You got this guy, it's about the business coach, gotta make sure I look all professional here and make sure, I got everything to look good, and gotta make sure I speak right, and let me make sure. There's a lot of politicians I'll talk to, and they're like, I gotta make sure I speak properly, right? Gotta make sure that I appeal to people, and I gotta make sure I remind them of certain things. They're playing into that game of a system where leadership is all about who looks or sounds the best. And that's not what leadership is. Leadership is actually leading people, helping them, influencing them, okay? Not convincing them or asking of them to do something for you. You show it in action. That's what leadership is. And anybody who studies leadership would understand this, right? Really basic. Some people would call it servant leadership, because that's what we need. That's where it's come to. Is where we have to differentiate different types of leadership. I mean, people do it in business organizations. See how much people like a boss who's dictating them around all day versus a boss that really works with them and communicates with them, right? See the difference. Here you see I have a documentary I created about this. All you need to know about real leadership goes over the idea of natural leaders and unnatural leaders, sort of the idea of an ego versus the eco, people working together versus one person, everybody else relying on this one person. And again, the question is it voluntary, right? Can you leave that hierarchy versus an involuntary hierarchy? Not all hierarchies are bad, right? There's hierarchies in nature all the time. The question is it voluntary or involuntary? Is it involuntary in the sense that you can't leave that interaction, right? You feel like you're obligated, and there's social pressures, all these things, and you can't leave that interaction. So you have to gather the courage yourself to escape out of boundaries are unhealthy, and then you can show others and be that example and radiate truth and love and honesty to everybody, right? That is the goal. That's what leadership is. It is putting the truth into action. And so then we have the way, right? Natural and unnatural way. Well, the way is also referred to as the Tao, right? I talked about the Tao a little bit before, but not enough. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But the Tao Te Ching is actually a book written long ago. And just because it was written long ago, I'm not saying necessarily that sort of validates it. I'm saying, however, that it's referring to the way of nature. It's specifically saying this is what it's about, nature, right? And so it's talking about this way that we have to follow and simply embrace our living, right? Embrace our lives naturally to be natural, right? Simply be natural to be natural. This is sort of the philosophy of the Tao Te Ching versus the unnatural that wants to reverse everything. The great reset. We need to change this and change this. You're going to own nothing. You're going to be happy. We're going to spy on you. We're going to create these new technology devices. Totally different from embrace. The total opposite, the total disregard of following the way of nature, totally disregard of the ancient wisdom, which so many people highly respect, by the way, of real leadership, and totally in the sense of, well, okay, we can create these new systems, it's based on unnatural leaders, it's based on unnatural, artificial intelligence, it's based on unnatural health. That is what it is, right? And so we have to question, between the agendas of the elite or the people in control of the world versus the people who want to simply live their life and follow the way of nature rather than follow the way of some man, of few men, and some politicians and some fake authority figures that they think are, important to follow in their life. So, it's a question again as to natural authority or man-made authority, and that determines your way. What is your way of living? You can see this related to the idea of principle, as we mentioned before. And then there's simplicity, right? Simplicity is a really important aspect. You can even go into complexity and say if that's natural or unnatural, right? But if I am to look at the simplicity, the natural version of simplicity is, well, living life simply as is. What is unnatural simplicity? Maybe it's having a sterile environment, simple things that are not so simple, but we think are simple, and they're bland. They're actually sterile and just not natural, right? So you have this white room, it lacks sophistication, it lacks uniqueness, it doesn't put us at ease, but we think it's safe, we think it provides the same benefits as that sometimes, but it doesn't, okay? It's not. It's actually the opposite in many cases. In complexity, the same thing, man-made complexity. We create all these complex things and we become so confused and wrapped in semantics, we lose a sense of ourselves. Whereas the complexity in nature, maybe we can learn to live with it. There's a time and place, however, right? To where if we want to embrace simplicity, embrace complexity, and know what they're supposed to be. Because, that tree is pretty complex. That refrigerator in there, or whatever is in there, that's pretty complex, right? But on the onset, yeah, this is pretty simple, just looking at it, right? Just observing it, taking it in. But having the natural world and simply what is as simple as you can get. It becomes less simple, when you have all the man-made stuff, and, it's a sort of fake form of simplicity to say, well, we'll put you in this secluded room that has nothing in it, right? It's sterile, it's clean, it's all just pure white, because it's still man-made. It's a fake form of simplicity. It's not actually clearing your mind, you're clearing your views. It's actually too bland, it's boring, it's not actually what your nature desires when it comes to simplicity. Now this is really core, and it ties into the idea of the Tao Te Ching, because the Tao Te Ching is about simplicity. Even Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau talk about this idea of simplicity over and over again, because when they would go out into nature, they'd have this idea of like, simplicity, 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 right? We don't need to live in a world of all this industrialization. This may look simple, but it isn't, right? It's not simple, and it actually leads to a lot of problems, this whole idea of a sterile environment, because the natural environment is simple, but yet there's all these complex organisms and bacteria, and it's not sterile at all. It would be considered dirty by modern standards, but yet that dirtiness is actually really simple and beautiful and healthy. And so there's a big difference in the simplicity between these things. So at the end of all this, and understanding what is natural and unnatural among all the many things in life, you have to question, well, what is the answer? Is your answer natural or unnatural, right? Any one of those things, if those are the answer to what you want, whether it's a diet or health or environment or principle or experimentation, freedom, if you want those things and you say, yeah, that is the answer to what I want, are you talking about if it's natural or unnatural? Is your answer natural or unnatural as a whole, as for what it is, for any one thing you're talking about? What is your answer? Is your embrace, what is it that you are choosing in this life? Are you going to choose the Great Reset, where man-made authority decides for everyone how life should be? Or are you going to choose the Tao Te Ching, where you embrace reality and live, peacefully and in harmony with the natural world and how things are, simply as is, and learning to adapt with nature and its cycles and its seasons, rather than trying to change everything and play as God? So, what does it mean to have an answer? It's your choice. An answer, if you look at the definition, it means to conform, correspond, and be responsible for, suffer the consequences of, respond in antiphony, respond in act or action, give back in kind, solve, find a result of. Old English in soiru, a response, a reply to a question, against, and in front of, before, affirmation, to swear, sworn statement rebutting a charge, make a statement in reply, solution of a problem. Okay, so if there's problems in this world, we're going to want answers. It's the same thing we say, well, problem solving. Well, how do we solve a problem? You need to provide an answer, right? How do you answer a question? You have to answer it. I mean, it's no surprise that when we say there's a question, we say there's also a problem that must be solved, and therefore we need an answer. And every time we do something, we're saying this is our answer to what we are given, right? We're given opportunities, just as we are with experiments. Every answer, everything we do is an experiment. It's also an answer. So with what we are given, we are choosing our choices. That is our answer. What are you answering the world with? What are you coming into the world with? That is what you are giving. And that is ultimately what you are taking. That is your answer. So isn't it interesting, the word answer is also what it means to be responsible for. So when people say, you know, our rights are a form of property, and we're looking at actions as being a form of property, what does that mean? It means that you have to be responsible for everything that you act upon, right? Because you own that action. That was an action that you carried out. And so suffer the consequences of, what is your answer to somebody else? What consequences are you giving to them? And what answer are you receiving back as a consequence, right? To respond and act or action, as it even says. Solve, find the result of. Isn't that interesting? To try to see, well, maybe there is a problem or there's a question, and we need to have a choice and an answer in response. So, affirmation, make a statement in reply or solution of a problem. So if your answer is natural, right, that is what you choose as the solution to a problem that you're trying to solve. Or you're choosing that as the answer to the question, to the problem. Whatever you're trying to solve, whatever you're responding to, right? Whatever you're corresponding to, whatever you're saying I'm responsible for. So answer plays a really big role. And so if we connect these terms that we just defined, nature and answer, you got nature, which is the course of things, the constitution, what literally makes this life. And then you have answer, which is to be responsible for. It's what you use to solve. It's what you conform to suffer the consequences of. Well, you have to conform to nature because it's all of life. So nature is the answer because you have to. Otherwise, you will suffer the consequences of. You will receive an answer from nature, right? Because it is the constitution, the course of things. It is what maintains order. And so what happens when you end up in chaos? You get distracted, unaligned. Well, the answers are going to come to you. Your life is going to be at question so you can find the answers. Because the answers are bound to the question, and you are the question. Your life, yourself, every human being is the question in this life. What actions are they taking? Who are they being? What consequences are they bringing with them, right? Within this world of nature. So, nature, right? And answer. You have nature, which is this world. The world, you can say it's life, you can say it's truth, you can say it's reality. And you got answer, right? Which is your choice. Do you choose to be in reality? Do you choose to be in the world? Are you trying to escape this world? Are you not happy with the world? Are you trying to work with the world? Are you trying to work against the world? That is your answer. And are you going to answer the call? If there are certain answers that are coming your way, are you going to grasp those answers and say, you know what, that is the answer I'm going to take? Or are you going to take a different answer? Right? What answer do you choose? The natural, the unnatural answer? The answer that's aligned to nature, or the answer that isn't? Either way, these are choices you all make with your nature within nature, right? So the good and the bad, the unnatural and the natural is all within nature, but it's your choice of what you want to do, right? So what does it mean to have an answer? It means to have purpose, intent, and reason. So I have a reason behind what I'm doing, and that's what makes me reasonable. And I have an intent behind what I'm doing, and that's what proves, whether this person is a criminal or not, is that intent. Did they mean to do harm? Did they want to do harm? How much knowledge do they have of that harm? Purpose. What is their purpose in this life? Is their purpose to find every way to benefit themselves or to benefit others, right? Are their purpose not to benefit the world and to rather destroy it because they're sick of the world? They can't align to nature, so all they can ever do is denature things. I mean, what is the purpose, intent, reason? It is your answer. That's what it means to have an answer. Okay, but in a world full of question, where you don't really know what the answer is, purpose, intent, and reason is going to go with it, right? And of course, it's going to be directed toward a different answer, but it's not really an answer because it's unnatural. So you can see the natural answer, so to speak, is nature, because that's what makes it natural. That's why having your answer be natural, whether it's all the topics we talked about before, or just looking at the basic idea of answer, is really important. Because without an answer, you have no meaning. You have, you have confusion. You don't have clarity. And you don't have direction or truth. But when you do have purpose or intent or a reason or the answer, right, you know what to do, it's because you have meaning. You have no confusion. You have clarity, direction, and truth. You have alignment, and you're able to fulfill that line. You know what line needs to be drawn. You say, I'll draw this line in the sand. This is my boundary. That's your boundary. This is my consciousness. This is your consciousness. We live amongst each other. Voluntary, cooperation, mutual trust, all these ideas coming from the idea of purpose, intent, reason, and answer, because you understand the nature of that individual is different from the nature of who you are. The nature of the world is one that you have to understand. That gives you a purpose. I have to understand the world. I have to work with the world. But if you don't have this purpose, intent, or reason, or it's not for nature, what is it for, right? So you must actively ask for it. Actively ask for the answer. Because if you don't, you have already asked. If you don't actively ask for, what is my purpose? What is my intent? What is my reason? Am I trying to improve? Am I trying to work with the world? If you're not actively asking for it, what are you asking for? Right? It's the same thing as, well, if you're disregarding or you're giving away your nature, who is it going to? And these are the questions you have to ask, because I'm saying you must actively ask for it. Because if you don't, you have already asked. You chose your fate. If you don't choose nature, if you don't choose following the natural, then you have asked to follow the unnatural, because you're disregarding it, as we talked about before. You want to be in ignorance of it. And so you choose your fate. Here's a quote: every individual acts and suffers in accordance with his peculiar teleology, which has all the inevitability of fate, so long as he does not understand it. By Alfred Adler. So notice the very end of this: so long as he does not understand this. So that means you really depend on knowledge even more. And how much do I have to say that, right? It should be obvious. Knowledge is important for our actions. But we're going to talk more about why it's important, because we still don't realize it's important as a human species to let evil continue, to let many unnatural things continue, or at least in the worst of forms. And so when we look at teleology, the word telos means purpose. Aristotle and a lot of the original philosophers talked about this word, telos, right? And they considered it a fabric of nature, something you can see everywhere, that everything has a purpose. This is something they talked about. And so when we see we have an answer in our life, right? We have an answer. This is following our purpose, what we know to be true. And so it has the inevitability of fate, our purpose. If we don't understand it, we're going to fall to our fate no matter what. We're going to find our purpose no matter what. We're going to learn our lesson no matter what, the lessons of laws. But the question is, if you work with the elements, you work with the world, you work with nature, say you're in the winter, you're in a storm, again, is it better to go against nature or to work with it? It's better to work with it because you can understand it and you can abide to it, you can increase your chances of survival. You have really no choice but to abide. But if you create a world where everything makes it convenient so you do not have to abide, then you might just not have to. But eventually you will, because again, nature will show itself through the lessons of loss over time. Time tells all truth. Nature is the truth. Nature is the answer. Thus, if you say truth is something that you desire, because you're saying it's your purpose, you're saying, I want the truth. That is my answer, right? Truth is the answer. Knowledge is the answer. These are all one and the same, because you can't have nature or truth without knowledge. That's what makes it nature. Otherwise, you can't define it, you don't understand it, you can't abide to it. So, in the process of understanding the nature answers all our questions. Another quote, right? In the process of understanding the nature, it could be the nature of one thing or many things, and everything self-reflective, it answers all our questions because we are looking for where the answers are. We know that nature is the constitution of all life, that it consists of everything, it's what creates the order. So thus, nature is where we can find the answers to all our questions. But it's up to us, we're at question if we're going to seek that answer or utilize that answer that's ever present. I mean, look outside your house and look outside many facilities. There's medicine all around you. You can say that is answers. Those are answers for cures for health problems that nobody is using because they never questioned the fact that they could use it for their medical problems, for their health. And that is just one example of how nature goes completely ignored or disregarded, yet it's all around them. It makes up their entire life. And if they were in nature, they'd actually be obligated to use it. But because of the unnatural world that surrounds them, they do not want to use it. They have no incentive of using it. They think there's better, more man-made solutions, and they find out and say, actually, it doesn't work, the man-made solutions. Because over time we see it's actually resulting in more death and more disease and actually complicating things even more. When again, the answers that nature provides us is actually not so difficult as we'll talk about. Nature answers only when she is questioned. Another quote.